Cole Walker hadn't spoken a kind word to another living soul in 3 years. So when he kicked open the door of a cabin everyone in Raven Creek called cursed, and found a woman crouched in the corner, knife raised, ribs showing through her torn dress, the last thing he expected was for her to lower that blade and whisper, "Please. I have nowhere left to go." He should have walked away. Every broken part of him said to walk away. He didn't. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel, follow every part until the very end, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1881 came to the Colorado mountains like a punishment. Heat pressed down on the pine ridges and baked the creek beds dry. Even the hawks stopped circling. The sky above Raven Creek sat white and still, the kind of stillness that made men feel they were being watched by something they couldn't name. Cole Walker rode into town on a Tuesday, which was the worst day to arrive anywhere. Tuesdays in Raven Creek meant the auction block was out. It meant Harlan Pruitt, the self-appointed town auctioneer, was standing on the courthouse steps with his coat buttoned wrong and his mouth running wide open. It meant half the town had gathered, not because they intended to buy anything, but because they had nothing better to do than watch other people lose what they had. Cole didn't slow his horse. He hadn't planned to stop in Raven Creek at all. He'd been following the ridge trail north, the way he always traveled alone, purposeful, with no destination that mattered. His horse, a dark bay gelding named Dispatch, had thrown a shoe 2 miles back. And Raven Creek was the only settlement within a day's ride that had a blacksmith. So Cole rode in. He tied Dispatch at the rail outside the smithy and walked toward the sound of Harlan Pruitt's voice without any particular interest in what the man was saying. Heard it anyway. Final call on the Alderman property. Mountain cabin, 40 acres of ridge land. Access all of it, ladies and gentlemen, for whatever any fool will pay. A few laughs from the crowd. Come on now, somebody's got to take it. Town council can't keep carrying the deed. Building's been empty 8 years. Roof's half caved. Land's rocky, north-facing, grows nothing but trouble and pine needles. Nobody? Pruitt wiped sweat off his forehead. Fine, we'll start the bid at $10. Who's got $10 they hate? Silence. Cole stopped walking. He didn't know why. Something made him stop, not curiosity exactly. More like the feeling a man gets when a sentence lands on him that was meant for someone else. He looked at Pruitt. He looked at the small pissoded sign leaning against the courthouse wall, the one with the deed number, and a rough sketch of the property location. North Ridge, above the tree line, 8 miles from town. 8 miles from anybody. $5, someone called from the back of the crowd. That's charity. $5, Pruitt repeated without enthusiasm. Do I hear 6? Nothing. Cole reached into his coat pocket. His fingers found a silver dollar, just the one he'd spent the rest on grain for Dispatch and a night at the last town's boarding house. Walked through the edge of the crowd, which parted for him, the way crowds always parted for a man his size, and he set the coin on the top of the auctioneer's podium. $1, he said. Pruitt stared at him. $1. You heard me, mister. $1 won't even cover the mine. You said whatever a fool will pay. Cole looked at him steady. I'm the fool. $1. The crowd went quiet for a moment. Then Harlan Pruitt started laughing. Not mean laughter, helpless laughter, the kind a man lets out when a situation has defeated him entirely. $1, Pruitt said. Going twice. He brought his gavel down. Sold to the man with more nerve than sense. The laughter from the crowd was loud and long. Cole picked up the deed Pruitt slid across to him, folded it without reading it, and put it in his coat pocket next to where the dollar had been. He didn't smile. He didn't look at the crowd. He walked back to the smithy to wait for his horse. A man named Gerald Birch, who ran the feed store on Main Street and considered himself something of a community ambassador, followed Cole to the smithy and stood in the doorway with his thumbs in his suspenders. You know why that land went for nothing, don't you? Birch said. It wasn't a question. Cole didn't answer. Fellow who built that cabin was named Alderman. Came up from New Mexico. Oh, about 10 years back. Wanted to homestead the North Ridge. Everybody told him it was bad land. Told him the soil was rock and the winters would kill him. He didn't listen. Birch paused for effect. Winter of 73 did him in. They found him in the spring, inside the cabin. Wasn't pretty. The blacksmith, a young man named Otis, who kept his eyes on his work, said nothing. People say the cabin's cursed, Birch continued. Say Alderman never really left. Wakes up feeling like someone's watching. He chuckled. Now, I don't believe in that sort of thing myself. But I figure you ought to know what you bought. Cole looked up from where he was inspecting Dispatch's hoof. You done? He said. Beg pardon? Are you done talking? A pause. I suppose I am. Good. Cole turned back to the horse. Then I thank you for the information and wish you a good afternoon. Birch left. Otis the blacksmith glanced sideways at Cole and said very quietly, he ain't wrong about the land. North Ridge soil is poor. You'll starve trying to farm it. I'm not farming it, Cole said. What are you doing with it then? Cole thought about it. Thought about the last 12 years of sleeping in other men's bunkhouses and rented rooms and open trail. He thought about the war he'd survived and the peace he'd never found. Thought about his friend Marcus, who died on the mountain pass 3 years ago because Cole had made the wrong call at the wrong moment, and whose face still appeared every time Cole closed his eyes in the dark. Peering, Cole said. Otis didn't ask anything else. He rode out of Raven Creek that same afternoon, with Dispatch newly shod and the deed to 40 fakes of North Ridge folded in his pocket. The trail climbed fast. The pines thickened. The air cooled not the comfortable cool of evening, but the sharp cool of elevation, where the summer heat that beat down on the valley floor couldn't quite reach. He found the cabin just before dark. It was worse than Pruitt had described. The front porch had collapsed on one side, tipping the whole structure at an angle that made the door frame a parallelogram instead of a rectangle. The roof had caved in over the back room. He could see that from outside, the way the ridgeline of the building dipped wrong in the middle. 2 windows were missing their glass. One still had glass, but it was cracked so completely that it held together only out of stubbornness. Chimney was standing, which Cole considered a good sign. He unsaddled Dispatch, tied him to a pine with enough rope to graze, and approached the cabin with the particular caution of a man who has opened enough wrong doors in his life to respect the ones he hasn't opened yet. He put his hand on the broken door frame and pushed. The door didn't move. He pushed harder. It swung inward, and Cole stepped through into the darkness, and the darkness moved. He had his hand on his gun before his eyes adjusted. 12 years of hard living had made him fast, but he didn't draw. Some instinct stopped him before the barrel cleared leather, something that wasn't fear but was adjacent to it, something that said, wait. The shape in the corner was a person, a woman. She was crouched against the back wall, the wall farthest from him, the wall farthest from the collapsed roof above, the one dry corner of a ruined cabin, and she had a knife. Not a small knife, a long-handled camp knife, the kind that meant business. She held it out in front of her with both hands, and even in the low light he could see her arms shaking with the effort. She was thin, badly thin. Thinner than hunger. This was starvation, the kind that had been happening for a while. Her dress was torn at the shoulder and the hem. Her hair, dark reddish-brown, was loose and matted. Her feet were bare. Her eyes green, he would realize later, were fixed on him, with an expression that was trying very hard to be ferocity and not quite making it, because underneath the ferocity was something else. Exhaustion. Total, complete exhaustion. The kind that comes when a person has been afraid for so long they've forgotten what it felt like not to be. Cole took his hand off his gun. He took one step back. I'm not here to hurt you, he said. She didn't lower the knife. Ma'am, he said. Don't. Her voice came out cracked. Dry. She hadn't had water recently. Don't you ma'am me. Don't you take another step. I won't. He stood still, both hands visible at his sides. I won't take another step. Who? Nobody sent me. I bought this cabin today, in town, for $1. Something shifted in her expression. Not trust, nowhere close to trust, but a flicker of something. Confusion, maybe. You bought it, she repeated. Yes, ma'am. Sorry, yes, I bought it. The deed's in my pocket if you want to see it. Why would you buy this cabin? Seemed like a good idea at the time. Arms were still shaking. The knife was still up. Ma'am, Cole said, aping his voice as flat and steady as he could make it, I can see you've been here a while. I can see you haven't eaten in some time. I'm not going to ask you who you are or why you're here, not tonight. But got dried venison and hardtack in my full bag, and I'd like to build a fire in that chimney if it still draws, and you're welcome to eat before you decide whether to trust me. Knife didn't waver. Why, she said. Why what? Why would you feed a stranger? Cole thought about it. He thought about a pass in the mountains 3 years ago, and a man named Marcus who had trusted the wrong person at the wrong time. He thought about what it meant to not help someone. He thought about what it cost. Because you're hungry, he said. That's reason enough. The knife came down, not all the way she still held it, close to her side but down. And she looked at him for a long moment with those exhausted green eyes, and then she said, me, very quietly. Name is Evelyn Carter. Cole Walker, he said. He nodded once, like she was filing the name away for future reference. There's a family of mice living in the wall behind me, she said. They keep me company at night. I want you to know that if you make trouble, I am not the only one who will be unhappy about it. Cole looked at her for a moment. Then he said, noted. He turned and went back out to get his saddlebag. The chimney drew well enough. He built a small fire in the hearth, more for light than warmth. The summer night didn't need warming, and he laid out what he had. Dried venison, hardtack, 2 strips of jerky he'd been saving for the trail. A canteen full of creek water he'd filled 2 miles back. He set everything on the floor between them and sat down on the opposite side of the fire from Evelyn Carter, and he watched her fight the urge to grab the food all at once. She lost the fight for exactly 3 seconds. Then she caught herself and slowed down, and he could see what that cost her. The deliberate slowing, the forced control. Eat, he said. I'm not counting. I'm not an animal, she said. No, you're not. Eat anyway. She ate carefully and quickly, which was the way a person ate when they'd been hungry long enough to understand what it meant. Cole drank from the canteen and chewed on a piece of hardtack and watched the fire and didn't watch her, because some forms of privacy are worth protecting even in a broken-down cabin on the side of a mountain. When she'd eaten enough that her hands stopped shaking, she said, How long have you been riding alone? Long time. Where were you before this? Nowhere worth mentioning. She looked at him across the fire. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. A pause. Outside, a nightbird called once and went quiet. They'll come looking for me, she said. Then after a beat, armed men, sent by a man named Harrison Vale. Cole set down the hardtack. Is Harrison Vale. He owns most of Raven Creek. Lumber operation, the main supply contract, 3 of the 4 buildings on the south end of Main Street. She paused. He also stole 400 acres of mountain land from the settlers who built their homesteads on it, starting about 6 years ago. He did it through the county clerk forged survey records, backdated deeds. Ran families off their land at gunpoint when the paper fraud wasn't enough. Cole was quiet. My father was one of those settlers, Evelyn said. He spent 4 years gathering documents, affidavits from families who'd been driven off, copies of the original survey records before they were changed, letters between Vale and the county clerk proving they were in it together. She looked at the fire. He was going to take it to the federal land office in Denver. He had a contact there, a commissioner who would listen. And, Cole said, and my father died in June, 3 weeks ago. She said it without flinching, which was the kind of not flinching that comes after you've spent enough time alone with the grief to have made a rough peace with it. Vale's men found him before he could get to Denver. They called it a fall. He fell off the North Ridge Trail. That night, her jaw tightened. My father knew that trail for 20 years. He could walk it blindfolded. Cole said nothing. He left me the documents, Evelyn said. I've had them since. Vale's men came to our homestead 4 days after the funeral. They burned it. I got out through the back with what I could carry. She glanced around the broken cabin. I've been moving, staying off the trail. I found this place last week. I didn't know anyone owned it. Nobody did, until today. Why did you really buy it? Cole leaned back against the wall. The fire popped, I told you. I wanted somewhere nobody could find me. And now somebody found you. You found the cabin, he said. I found you. Does that change things? He thought about it honestly, the way you have to think about things when you're too tired to lie to yourself. I don't know yet, he said. Evelyn Carter looked at him for a long moment. I don't need you to save me, she said. I want to be clear about that. I know what I'm carrying. I know what I have to do. I just need time and a place to rest and think. I'm not trying to save you. Good. I'm trying to eat my hardtack in peace. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile too tired for that, but the beginning of one. Hardtack is terrible, she said. It always is. He slept on the side of the cabin with the intact roof. She stayed in her corner. Neither of them said goodnight. But somewhere in the space between midnight and morning, Cole woke to the sound of her coughing, a deep, racking cough that she was clearly trying to muffle, and he lay there in the dark listening and said nothing and felt something shift in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in years. Not quite responsibility. Not quite anger. Something closer to this is wrong, and someone should make it right, which is the oldest and most dangerous feeling a man like Cole Walker could have, because it had never yet led anywhere easy. He closed his eyes. He told himself he would figure it out in the morning. Morning came hard and bright, the way Colorado summer mornings always do, slamming through the cracked window glass and the open door frame and filling the cabin with more light than it deserved. Ole was already outside when Evelyn woke. He'd found the creek half a mile down the ridge and come back with a full canteen. He'd also found, in the collapsed section of the cabin's back room, a rusted iron pot that was still serviceable, and a small stack of dry wood someone had cut and stacked against the inside wall years ago, possibly Thomas Alderman himself. Evelyn appeared in the doorway. She'd pinned her hair back with whatever she had, two small wooden sticks, the kind for darning, and her dress was still torn, but she'd folded and tucked it in a way that made it look less like ruins. She stood straight. She looked like someone who had decided overnight what she was going to be about today. She looked at the canteen in his hand. You went to the creek, she said. Quarter mile down the east slope. Runs clear. She took the canteen when he offered it and drank without comment. Then she handed it back. Vale's men know these mountains, she said. Two of them, at least. A man named Cutter and another one they called Doyle. Cutter tracked elk through the San Juans one winter. He knows how to read a trail. How many men does Vale keep on payroll? 6 that I've seen. Could be more. Cole looked out at the ridge. A pine line. The open slope above. He knew what this land looked like from above because he'd come up through it. He knew where a man on horseback would have to come from, the one passable route up from the valley. They'll come from the south approach, he said. Only way a horse can make it. I know, and you came up the east slope, on foot. She glanced at his horse. I don't have a horse, I noticed. A silence. A jay screamed somewhere in the pines and went quiet. You said last night you don't need saving, Cole said. I meant it. All right, he looked at her. But I'm asking you a straight question, and I need a straight answer. Those documents your father collected, where are they now? Evelyn reached into the tied bundle she'd been sleeping on. Unwrapped 2 layers of oilcloth. Inside was a leather satchel, old and worn, with a brass clasp that had been repaired once with wire. Here, she said, I've had them on me every minute since the funeral. Enough. If they got to Denver, if the right person saw them, would that be enough to bring Vale down? Didn't hesitate. Yes, my father was meticulous. Dates, names, witness statements. He cross-referenced everything. Nay, the federal commissioner would have grounds to convene a full land fraud investigation. Vale would lose not just the stolen land, but everything he built on it. Lumber operation, the town contracts, everything. And the commissioner in Denver. You know how to reach him? I have his name and the address of his office. My father wrote it down. Cole was quiet for a moment. He looked at the damaged cabin, broken porch, the collapsed roof over the back room. He looked at the ridgeline, and the long slope down to the valley and the road that wound south toward Raven Creek. He thought about a man named Thomas Alderman who had come up here 10 years ago wanting something quiet and had ended up building something small and real and his own. He thought about Thomas Alderman walking that North Ridge Trail at night, which he'd walked for 20 years and could have done blindfolded, and not coming back. He thought about Marcus. There's a route through the upper pass, Cole said. Foot travel only, no horse can make it. It comes out on the north side of the range, 2 days' walk from the Denver road. I know it, I've used it. Evelyn looked at him carefully. You'd be a wanted man, she said, if you help me. Vale has connections at the county level. He'd call it robbery or kidnapping or whatever, lie fit the moment. It'd be on the wrong side of his law. Wouldn't be the first time I was on the wrong side of someone's law, Cole said. Noel. She said his name like she was testing its weight. I need you to understand what I'm asking. Not for me, I didn't ask you for anything. But if you're thinking about this, I'm not thinking about it, he said. I thought about it last night. She stared at him. And your father built something that mattered, and Vale burned it down. And now Vale's men are riding towards Mountain to find a woman alone, with a satchel full of evidence, and if they get to her first, 400 acres of stolen land stays stolen, and 6 families never get what they're owed. He looked at her steadily. And I've got a ruined cabin I bought for $1, and nowhere in particular to be. She was very quiet for a long moment. Then she said, you could just leave. Alpes approaches before they get here. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe anyone anything. No, Cole agreed. Then why? He didn't have a neat answer. He didn't have any answer, really, except the one that lived in the place below words, the place where Marcus's face still appeared in the dark, where the memory of a wrong call on a mountain pass still lived, where the weight of not helping and the cost of it sat like a stone in the center of a man's chest. Because you lowered the knife, he said finally. Evelyn looked at him. Last night, he said, when I told you I wasn't here to hurt you. You could have kept the knife up. You didn't. You made a choice to trust something. He paused. That takes more courage than most people give it credit for. I don't intend to make you regret it. The silence between them was long and full of something that neither of them had a name for yet. Then Evelyn Carter tucked the satchel back inside the oilcloth wrapping, folded it carefully, and looked up. Back room, she said. The collapsed section. There's usable timber in the wreckage. If we're going to be here more than a day, that roof should be patched. It'll rain by Thursday. You know the weather up here? I've been living on this mountain for a week. I know the clouds. She moved past him toward the back of the cabin. Nair, are you going to stand there or are you going to help? Cole looked at the pine ridge. He looked at the long southern slope. He looked at the ruined cabin that was, as of yesterday afternoon, his. He followed her inside. The timber in the collapsed back room was salvageable. Most of it, anyway. Cole worked with the efficiency of a man who had fixed things his whole life, not because he loved fixing things, but because broken things had always found their way to him, and he had never been able to walk past them without stopping. He pulled the fallen beams out one by one, checked each one for rot, discarded the ones that crumbled under pressure, stacked the good ones against the outside wall. It was hot work. The summer sun had found the angle over the ridge that made the cabin's exposed back section feel like a brick oven. Evelyn worked beside him. She didn't ask permission. She didn't announce that she was helping. She simply started moving debris on the other side of the collapsed section, sorting through the wreckage with the methodical focus of someone who had grown up making use of whatever was available. She was quiet while she worked, but not the uncomfortable kind of quiet. The kind of quiet that meant something was going on behind her eyes that she hadn't decided to share yet. Joel noticed it. He didn't say anything. After an hour, she stopped and held up a rusted iron hinge, still attached to a piece of door frame. If the back door's gone, this could be remounted. Door frame on the east side is still solid. Cole looked at it. Where'd you find that? Under the third beam you pulled out. Almost threw it in the discard pile. He took it from her hand. Over. The rust was surface level, the iron itself was sound. You've done repair work before. My father's homestead didn't fix itself, she said. Then she went back to moving debris. Cole watched her for a moment longer than he meant to. It went back to work. By midday, they had enough usable timber to begin patching the roof section. Cole went up with rope and nails he'd found in a rusted tin inside the hearth nook. Thomas Alderman, whoever he'd been a man who put things in logical places, which Cole respected, and Evelyn stood below and handed materials up when he called for them. They didn't talk much, but when they did talk, it was practical and direct, the way people talk when they're focused on a shared problem, and Cole found that he didn't mind it. Minded very few things about Evelyn Carter, which was itself unusual enough to notice. He was on the roof when he heard the horse, one horse, coming up from the south approach. He went still. Evelyn, he said quietly. She heard it in his voice. She stopped, looked up at him. He held up two fingers, then pointed south. She nodded once and moved immediately back through the cabin door. No hesitation, no wasted motion. Cole came down from the roof in two moves, landed in the dirt, and had his hand on his gun before his boots were settled. He came over the ridge crest and stopped. He was old. 60, maybe older. Thin as wire, with a sun-weathered face and a dusty brown coat that had seen 30 years of hard use. He rode a mule, not a horse, which was the first reassurance. He held both hands away from his body as soon as he saw Cole, a gesture of long habit, the gesture of a man accustomed to arriving at uncertain places. Easy, friend, the old man said. Name's Abe Colton. I run the supply post down at the valley crossroads. I'm not looking for trouble. Cole kept his hand where it was. What are you looking for? I came up to check on the old Alderman place. I do it every spring and summer, have for years, just to make sure nobody's camping in there and starting fires that'll take the ridge with them. He squinted down at Cole. You must be the fellow who bought the deed yesterday. Travels fast in a small town, apparently. That's all this is. Just a check. Abe Colton looked at the cabin, at the fresh timber stacked against the wall, at the evidence of work being done. You're fixing it up. Patching the roof. The old man tilted his head, the way someone does when they're looking at more than the obvious thing. Eyes moved to the cabin door, back to Cole. You alone up here? Said nothing. Abe Colton nodded slowly. All right. None of my business. He started to rein the mule around, then stopped. You planning on staying in Raven Creek long? Don't know yet. The old man hesitated. Something moved across his calculation, a decision. Then I'll say this much and no more. Harrison's had 2 men at my supply post yesterday evening, asking questions about who might be traveling the North Ridge, what they might be carrying. He looked directly at Cole. I told them I hadn't seen anyone, which was true at the time. He pulled his mule around. Have a good afternoon. He rode back down the south slope without looking back. Cole stood in the dirt for a long moment after the sound of hooves faded. Then he went inside. Evelyn was at the hearth, completely still, the satchel held against her chest with both arms. You heard, Cole said, every word. She looked up at him. Didn't tell them anything. No. But he knows someone's here now. Do you think he'll tell them? Cole thought about the old man's face. The hesitation before he'd said what he said. The way he'd phrased it, I told them I hadn't seen anyone. Which was true at the time. A man who wanted to cover his tracks would not have added that last sentence. No, Cole said, I don't. Evelyn let out a breath she'd been holding for a while. How did Vale's men get to the supply post so fast? It's only been a week since I left the homestead. Vale knows you're alive, and he knows you're on foot. He knows you can't have gotten far. He's covering every approach to the mountain. Cole crossed to the east window, the one with the cracked glass, and looked out at the ridge. Cutter, you said he knows these mountains. He spent time in the San Juans. Her voice was steady. Good. How good? Good enough to move 3 times in the first 4 days. I thought I'd lost him. She paused. I hadn't. He found the second camp I made. I saw him coming up the slope from half a mile back, and I ran. I only lost him because I went up instead of down. People who don't know mountains always think down is faster. Cole turned from the window. He looked at her. She was still holding the satchel, but her arms had loosened. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, the one she'd been crouched against last night, and in the afternoon light coming through the cracked glass, she looked exhausted in a way that sleep wouldn't entirely fix. The kind of tired that lives in the bones. How long were you running before you found this cabin? He asked. Maybe 5. I lost track of the date. She looked at the satchel. I kept thinking about my father, about what he would say if I gave up. If I let Vale win. A muscle worked in her jaw. My father was not a man who gave up on things. He had that land for 16 years. He built a house on it with his own hands. He planted apple trees. She stopped. Vale burned those trees too. When they burned the house, the silence had weight. Evelyn, Cole said. She looked up. We need to talk about getting to Denver. She spread her father's maps on the cabin floor. They were hand-drawn, detailed in the way of a man who'd spent years learning a piece of land by walking it. Thomas Carter had marked every trail, every seasonal creek, every ridgeline. He'd also marked in red ink, in his careful handwriting, the route to the North Pass. Noel crouched over the map and studied it. Your father knew the Upper Pass route, he said. He used it once, years ago, before Vale's operation pushed into that area. He said it was difficult. She pointed. Here, trail cuts along the east face of the ridge. There's a section about half a mile where it narrows to maybe 3 feet wide. Sheer rock on one side, drop on the other. I know that section. You've used the pass. 3 years ago. Coming south. He traced the route with one finger without touching the paper. It's 2 days on foot to the north side. From there, the Denver road is another day's ride, but we'd need horses. Or a stage. There's a station on the north road, she said. Name a station. My father marked it. He said the station master there was honest. It's a long shot. Everything about this is a long shot. She met his eye. But the documents are solid. If we get to Denver, if we get to Commissioner Harris, the land frauds is airtight. Goes down. Every family he stole from gets a federal ruling in their favor. Cole looked at the map for another moment, at the distance. At the terrain. We can't take dispatch, he said. Horse can't make the Upper Pass, and I'm not leaving him here for Vale's men to find. I know someone in town who might hold him, Evelyn said. Eder. Who? She hesitated. Just briefly. Cole sat back, thought about that. Thought about the old man on the mule, and the careful way he'd phrased his warning, and the fact that a man who wanted to cover chest tracks wouldn't add the last sentence. You know Colden, he said. My father knew him. It went back years. She looked at her hands. Colton lost land to Vale too. A small parcel, he sold it under duress, a bad price, when Vale made it clear the alternative was worse. It never proved anything. He's been angry about it for 6 years. She paused. It'd help if I asked him, if he helped and Vale found out. I know what the risk is for him. He knows too. She lifted her chin. He's a grown man who can make his own choices. Cole looked at her for a long moment. You've been planning this, he said. Not just surviving. Planning. I've had a week alone on a mountain. Not much else to do. You should have said this last night. Last night I didn't know if I could trust you. And now? She held his gaze. Now I've watched you work all morning without asking me to thank you for it. And you let Abe Colton ride away without threatening him, when threatening him would have been easier. She paused. Min, you bought a ruined cabin for $1 because you wanted somewhere quiet, which means you're not looking for reward or recognition. She stopped. Just what? Tired, she said. The same kind of tired I am. Something about that sentence went into Cole Walker, like a key turning in a lock he'd forgotten was there. He didn't show it, but it happened. Tonight, he said. Go to Colton tonight. We ask him to take Basach and hold him on the valley side. Then we make the upper pass tomorrow morning, first light. Evelyn nodded. All right, between now and then, waitin', Cole said. At standing. We finish that roof patch. You said it rains by Thursday. She almost smiled. Did say that. Then let's get to it. They went to Colton's supply post after dark. Cole led dispatch by the bridle on foot, taking the slope down through the pine line instead of the trail, moving slow and quiet. Evelyn walked ahead, picking the route from memory, stepping around loose shale with the confidence of some who'd learned that ridge, with survival as the teacher. Supply post sat at the valley crossroads, a low building with a lamp burning in the window. Colton answered the door before Cole knocked, which meant he'd heard them coming. He looked at Evelyn. His weathered face did something complicated. Miss Carter, he said. His voice was rough, gentle. Your father, she said. I know Abe. The old man put a hand briefly on her shoulder. Just for a moment. Then he looked at Cole. You're the man who bought the cabin. Cole Walker, you intend to see her to Denver. I intend to see the evidence to the right people. Colton was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the doorway and let them in. The conversation was short and direct, the way important conversations are when everyone involved understands the stakes. Knowlton agreed to take dispatch. He had a small corral behind the post that wasn't visible from the road. He also pressed into Cole's hands two things that Cole hadn't asked for and couldn't have paid for: a hand-drawn secondary map of the upper pass with water sources marked, and a letter already written, already sealed. Code. What's this? Cole said. Letter to Commissioner Harris in Denver, Colton said. My own account. Vale's land dealings, what I know for firsthand, what I saw done to Thomas Carter and the others. He looked at Cole steadily. I've been sitting on that letter for 2 years, waiting for a safe way to get it there. He glanced at Evelyn. Seems like the way just arrived. Evelyn looked at the sealed letter in Cole's hand. Her eyes were bright, in a way she was working to control. You could have been killed for writing that, she said. Have been, Colton agreed. But your father didn't stop. And he had more to lose than I do. He moved to the door and held it open. You need to be gone before the road gets any traffic. Cutter was seen in town at sundown. He's still looking. Cole tucked the letter into the satchel alongside Thomas Carter's documents. He tipped his head at the old man. Obliged, he said. Don't thank me, get her there. They were back up the ridge before midnight. The cabin was quiet and dark and still smelled of the fire they'd built the night before. Cole barred the door, not that the bar would stop anyone serious, but it would give them a moment's warning. He checked the east window, checked the south slope. Nothing moving. Evelyn set the satchel down, with the care of someone putting a child to bed. Cole said, We leave at first light. I'll take the first watch. You need sleep too. I'll sleep second half of the night. I've done worse. She looked at him, Cole. He looked back. Vale's going to come after us personally, she said. Not just his hired men. When Cutter reports that I'm gone and the documents are gone, Vale will come. He has too much to lose to trust anyone else with it. I know. He's dangerous. Not just powerful. He's the kind of man who she stopped. Chose her words. When my father started asking questions years ago, there were 2 other men who were asking the same questions. A farmer named Breckett and a lawyer who'd come up from Pueblo. Both of them stopped asking questions. She paused. Within a month of each other, the fire had burned down to coals. The light in the cabin was amber and low. What happened to them? Cole said. Breckett had an accident with farm machinery. The lawyer left town. Nobody knows where he went. She looked at Cole directly. Vale doesn't threaten. He solves. That's what makes him dangerous. Cole held her gaze. Then we make sure he doesn't have the chance, he said. A silence. Outside, something moved in the pines, a branch, wind, an animal. They both heard it. They both went still. Cole had his hand on his gun before the sound resolved itself into nothing, just the night settling. Evelyn let out a breath. "You do that fast," she said. "Gun. How did you learn?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "Hecting supply wagons, crossing mountain passes. For a company, out of," he paused, "for about 5 years. Then you stopped, and then I stopped." She didn't push. She could hear the edge of something in his voice, the same edge she'd heard last night when he'd said nowhere worth mentioning, and she understood the shape of a door that a person wasn't ready to open. "Get some sleep," she said instead. "I'll take first watch." Noel looked at her, started to object. "I've been keeping watch for a week," she said flatly. "I know how to do it, and you've been doing roof work since morning." She picked up the camp knife from beside her bedroll. "I'll wake you in 3 hours." He looked at the knife. He looked at her. "All right," he said. He lay down on his side of the cabin, coat over his shoulders, boots on. He was asleep inside of 4 minutes, the sleep of a man who had trained himself to drop fast and wake fast, in that order. Evelyn sat by the east window, with the knife in her lap, and watched the dark, and thought about her father. She woke Cole at the 3-hour mark, precisely the way she said she would. He sat up instantly, hand moving before his eyes were open. "Nothing," she said quietly. "Quiet all night." He nodded. Got up. She lay down in her corner, and in the 2 hours before dawn, while Cole watched the slope and the tree line and the lightening sky, something happened that he would not examine too closely until much later. He thought about the cabin, not about what it lacked: the broken roof, the missing glass, the floor that needed relaying. About what it had, the sound the chimney made when the wind shifted. The way the east window caught the first morning light before anything else in the valley. The apple tree, he'd noticed it that afternoon. A gnarled old tree on the south slope, half wild, clearly not tended in years, but still standing. Still putting out leaves. Thomas Alderman had planted that tree. Or maybe Thomas Carter himself had, in the years before Vale's people started watching. Either way, someone had put something in this ground and meant for it to stay. Cole stood at the east window and watched the sky go from black to gray to the particular pale gold of a Colorado summer morning, and he thought, this is a place someone could come back to. The thought surprised him. He didn't have time to sit with it. Because that was when he heard the second horse. Not one horse this time. 3. Moving fast up the south approach. Evelyn. His voice came out sharp and low, and she was on her feet before he finished the word. "Get the satchel now. We go out the east side and up to the tree line." 3 riders, too fast for a casual visit. He already had his rifle in his hands. "Go." She grabbed the satchel and the knife, and she didn't say another word. She was at the east wall before Cole had his coat on, squeezing through the gap where the east window used to be, dropping to the ground on the far side. Cole went after her. They were in the tree line before the riders crested the ridge. He pulled her down behind a fallen log. She was already low, already moving right, and they lay still in the pine needles and the cold morning air and watched. 3 men on horseback, coming hard over the south rise and pulling up in front of the cabin. One of them, the one in front, was lean and sharp-featured, the way a man looks when he's been outdoors a long time and never stopped being watchful. He didn't look at the cabin first. He looked at the ground around it. The boot prints in the dirt. "That's Cutter," Evelyn breathed, barely a sound. Cole said nothing. He watched. Cutter dismounted, crouched over the prints in the dirt outside the cabin door. Stood up. Looked at the timber stacked against the cabin wall, the work Cole and Evelyn had done yesterday, with an expression that had no emotion in it at all. Pure calculation. He walked to the east wall, found the gap where the window had been. Crouched again, looked at the ground on the far side. Looked up at the tree line. Cole's hand tightened on the rifle. Stood, slowly, and looked directly at the section of tree line where they were. Not at Cole and Evelyn specifically, at the section. At the tree line that a man and a woman fleeing on foot would have run toward. He looked at it the way you look at a thing when you already know the answer and you're just confirming it. He turned back to the other 2 riders. They went up, he said. His voice carried in the cold morning air. Upper pass. That's the only way that makes sense. A pause. Girl's got a partner now. A man. Somebody who knows these mountains. He looked at the North Ridge. Back to town. Tell Vale. The second rider leaned forward. And you? Cutter checked his rifle. Cole looked at Evelyn. She was already looking at him. They did not need to speak. They moved, low and fast, deeper into the trees. They ran until the slope took over and running became climbing. Cole went first, Evan, picking the route, testing the ground before committing his weight, moving with the quick decision-making of someone who'd spent years on terrain that didn't forgive mistakes. Evelyn was right behind him, keeping pace, breathing hard but controlled. She didn't complain. She didn't ask how much farther. She climbed. They put 300 feet of elevation between themselves and the cabin before Cole stopped at a shelf of exposed rock and turned to look back. Cutter was at the tree line already. Cole had known trackers in his life. Good ones. But this man moved through the pine line, the way water moves through cracks, finding the path of least resistance without pausing to look for it. He's faster than I thought, Cole said. I told you, Evelyn said, between controlled breaths. It did. Cole looked at the route above them. The upper pass trail cut east along the ridge face, but to reach it they had to cross 200 yards of open slope, no cover, no concealment. A man with a rifle and a clear line of sight could take that shot from the tree line below. He looked back at Cutter, still picking his way up through the pines. Made a decision. Keep going, he said. Don't stop. Get to that rock formation, he pointed to the cluster of boulders on the upper slope, and get behind it. Wait for me there. Evelyn looked at him. What are you doing? Buying time. He held her gaze. I am not going to shoot a man in the back, but I am going to make sure he doesn't have a clear of that open slope while you cross it. He looked at her steadily. I'll come around the long way. I know a route. I'll meet you at the boulders. She stared at him. There were 100 things moving behind her eyes, and she shut them down one by one, the way a person does when they understand that arguing will cost more than trusting. 10 minutes, she said. If you're not there in 10 minutes. I'll be there, she went. Cole watched her move across the open slope fast, head down, using the shallow creek cuts as cover where she could. She made the boulders in less than 3 minutes. Good. He turned and went east along the ridge, below the tree line, moving parallel to the slope. And he found what he was looking for, a natural break in the rocks, a tumble of boulders where the ridge cracked decades ago, the kind of terrain that made noise when someone moved through it carelessly. He waited. Cutter came up through the tree line, 30 yards to his left. Cole let him see it. Not himself the place where the rocks would make noise. A suggestion of a route. Cutter paused. At the rocks, looked at the open slope, made a decision. He went for the open slope. He hadn't seen Evelyn cross it. He was tracking Cole's position from the tree line, and Cole had just redirected him. Cole moved, fast low east along the base of the ridge to the point where the terrain curved back north. He came up the far side of the boulder cluster from below, the way no one who hadn't been on this mountain before would know to go. Evelyn was there, flat against the rock face, knife in hand, watching the slope below. He came over the edge of the boulder, and she turned, knife raised, and then she recognized him and lowered it, and he could see in her face the exact moment the held breath released. Minutes, she said. I said 10, I was counting. He was breathing hard. He crouched beside her and looked down the slope. Cutter was a small figure on the open snowfield, 150 yards below and east, moving the wrong direction, reading a trail that had gone cold. He'll figure it out, Cole said. 20 minutes, maybe. Enough. He looked at the pass route above them. Need to move. Evelyn stood, adjusted the satchel strap across her shoulder. Joel. She said his name and stopped. What, back there? You could have left. You could have taken the long route and gone north without coming back for me. Would have followed you, not me. I would have had time to get to the pass. Cole looked at her. That's true. But you came back. I said I would. She looked at him for a moment longer than the situation required. I know, but people say a lot of things. Cole held her gaze. I'm not most people. Something shifted in her expression. Not softness exactly. Evelyn Carter was not a woman who softened easily, but something that acknowledged the sentence and gave it weight. No, she said quietly, you're not. She started up the pass route without another word. Cole looked back down the slope one more time. Cutter was still moving east, following the false trail, but he'd slowed. Starting to doubt it. Cole turned north and followed Evelyn Carter up the mountain. Below them, hidden in the valley she could no longer see, Harrison Vale was riding hard toward Raven Creek, his jaw set and his eyes cold, because Cutter's message had reached him an hour ago. Harrison Vale was not a man who waited for others to solve his problems. Coming. The upper pass trail was exactly as brutal as Thomas Carter's map had suggested, and exactly as brutal as Cole's memory of it. The route cut along the east face of the ridge at an elevation where the summer heat of the valley couldn't reach, and the air had a thin, cutting quality that made every breath feel slightly insufficient. The trail was not a trail in any comfortable sense of the word, it was a seam in the rock, a suggestion of a path left by decades of mountain goats, and the occasional desperate human being who had no better option. In some places it widened enough for two people to walk abreast. In most places it did not. Evelyn moved ahead of Cole with the satchel strapped tight across her chest, one hand on the rock face beside her, the other free for balance. She didn't look down. Cole had noticed that about her she made decisions about what not to look at, and she stuck to them, which was a form of discipline that most people didn't develop until they'd been in enough bad situations to understand that panic was a choice. Cole kept one eye on the trail ahead and one ear on the slope below. The first hour he heard nothing. The second hour was when things changed. He heard the shot before he registered what it was, a flat crack, that the mountain threw back and forth between rock faces until it lost its direction entirely. Near. But the chip of stone that flew off the ridge face 6 inches from Evelyn's right hand told him everything he needed about where it had come from. Down, he said. She was already down. They pressed flat against the rock face, and Cole looked back along the trail behind them. The shot had come from below and east from the open snowfield where he'd last seen Cutter moving in the wrong direction. Which meant Cutter had figured out the misdirection faster than Cole had given him credit for, and had come up the east approach, and had a rifle with enough range to reach the trail face. Cole pulled Evelyn tight against the rock. How far to the narrow section? 100 yards, maybe more. She had the satchel clutched against her chest. Her breathing was controlled. Her eyes were working. If we get past the narrows, he loses the angle. The ridge juts out, he can't see the trail past that point from below. 100 yards is a long way on open trail, I know. Another shot. This one closer, it hit the rock above them, and the impact threw dust and chips down on their heads. Cutter was ranging them. Finding the distance, Cole looked at the trail ahead. 100 yards of exposed traverse. The jut of the ridge that would give them cover visible from where they crouched, maddeningly close, maddeningly far. Evelyn, when I move, you move. Stay low and stay behind me. Don't stop for anything, you understand. You can't cover me and run at the same time. I'm not covering you. I'm drawing his aim. He held her eyes. I'm bigger, and I'm slower, and I make a better target. You're faster, so stay behind me and use that. She looked at him with an expression that had anger in it, and fear in it, and something else that didn't have a name. Don't get shot, she said. Wasn't planning on it. They moved. The next 30 seconds were the longest of Cole Walker's recent life. Ran low and fast along the trail, keeping his body between Evelyn and the slope below, and Cutter fired twice. He heard both shots, felt the second one pass close enough to disturb the air near his left ear. Close enough that he understood what luck was and how thin it ran. Evelyn was right behind him, matching his pace, not a step behind where she needed to be. Ridge jut came up fast, and Cole threw himself around it and pulled Evelyn after him, and they hit the far side of the rock and stayed there, both of them breathing hard, pressed against stone. No more shots. The angle was gone. Cutter had lost them. Evelyn's hand found Cole's arm in the aftermath just for a second, fingers gripping above his elbow, and then she let go. "You all right?" he said. "Yes, a breath." He checked himself. "No holes, nothing wet, fine." She looked at him and didn't say anything, but the look said enough. They made the north side of the pass by late afternoon. The descent was steep but straightforward, and they moved fast, the way people move when they know something is still behind them, and the only answer to that is distance. Oak's legs were burning by the time they reached the tree line on the north slope. Evelyn's weren't, or if they were, she didn't show it, but he could see the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders, the way she was moving on will rather than energy. "Rest," he said, when the trees gave them cover. "We should keep moving." "Minutes. Drink some water and rest, or you'll be useless in another hour." To argue, looked at his face. Sat down. Cole sat across from her and drank from the canteen Colton had pressed on them and looked at the sky through the pine canopy. Light. Maybe 2 hours before dark. The North Road and Colby Station were still a hard day's walk away. "You knew he'd cut to the east approach," Evelyn said. "Suspected. You suspected and you didn't tell me." Telling you wouldn't have changed the route. It would have just given you something extra to carry." He looked at her. "Had enough to carry." She was quiet for a moment. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Decide what I should and shouldn't know." "I'm not fragile." "I know you're not. Then treat me like it." Cole held her gaze. She was right. He knew she was right, and the fact that she called it directly instead of stewing, that was something. He'd known men twice her age who couldn't do that. "Here," he said. "It won't happen again." She studied him. Decided he meant it. Nodded once. They finished the water in silence. Cole was about to stand when he heard hoofbeats on the slope below. Coming fast, not from behind them but from the west, from the valleyside trail that connected the North Pass approach to the main road. More than one horse, moving with purpose. Cole was on his feet and pulling Evelyn deeper into the trees before she'd registered what she was hearing. Found a dense cluster of pines and went still and waited. 4 riders came up the trail below them at a speed that meant urgency. Cole watched through the trees. 3 of the riders he didn't know Vale's men, by the look of them, armed and hard-faced. The 4th rider was in front, Harrison Vale. Cole had never seen the man before, but he would have known him anyway. There was a particular way that powerful men sat a horse when they were angry, like the horse and the land and everything on it already belonged to them, and they were merely reclaiming what was theirs. Vale was somewhere around 50, broad through the chest, dressed better than anyone had a right to be on a mountain trail. He rode with the easy authority of someone who had never had to ask permission for anything. He pulled up his horse 50 yards below their position and raised one hand. The other riders stopped. Vale looked at the trail, looked at the pass above, looked at the tree line. Didn't breathe. "They're through the pass," Vale said. His voice carried clear and cold in the mountain air. It confirmed it. He turned to the rider on his right. "How long to ride around to the North Road?" 4 hours. 5 if we push the horses, Vale calculated. They're on foot. They'll stop at dark. He looked at the pass again. "We get to the North Road before they reach Colby Station. We cut them off." He pulled his horse around. Move. They rode west at a gallop. Cole let out a breath against the tree bark. Evelyn's mouth was close to his ear. "He's going around. He knows the pass on foot takes us longer than horses on the valley road." Cole did the math. Vale was right. 4 hours by horse versus a day's walk on foot, they'd reach the North Road before Cole and Evelyn reached Colby Station. "He'll be waiting for us." "Then we can't go to Colby Station." "No." Cole thought hard. "There's another option." Ayton mentioned a mail relay point 15 miles east on the North Road. Smaller, less known. But if we cut through the lower North Valley instead of following the pass trail down, it adds hours. It also puts us somewhere Vale isn't expecting. He looked at her. He thinks he knows where we're going because he knows the obvious route. We take the non-obvious route. Evelyn thought about it. She wasn't slow. He could see her running the options, seeing the same angles he was seeing, making her own calculation. East Valley drops eventually, she said. It has to all the north drainages do. If we follow the drainage east, it'll bring us down to the road, past the point where Vale will be waiting. That's what I'm thinking. She looked at him. It's going to be dark in 2 hours. Then, we'd better move. They walked through the last 2 hours of light and into the dark, and Cole navigated by the drainage and the stars where he could see them through the canopy, and Evelyn stayed at his shoulder without complaint. They stopped once when she caught her foot on a root and went down hard, and Cole had her up in a second, and she said, "I'm fine, keep going." And he believed her. They made camp, if you could call it that, in a shallow overhang of rock above the drainage creek, where the stone held the day's warmth and the sound of the water covered their voices. No fire. Cole spread his coat on the ground for Evelyn, and she didn't argue about it, which told him how tired she really was. She curled around the satchel and was asleep within minutes. Sat against the rock face and watched the dark. He thought about Harrison Vale's face, the calculation in it. The complete, cold absence of doubt. Vale was not a man who feared consequences because he had spent years making himself into someone who controlled them. Ick's families, 2 dead men. Thomas Carter on a mountain trail at night. 40 years of honest settlement, stolen and laundered through forged paperwork and county clerk corruption, and the brute machinery of money and intimidation. And Vale was riding right now, 4 horses hard on the valley road, to cut off a woman and a man carrying the documents that could end all of it. Cole's jaw tightened. He looked at the satchel, there in the dark beside Evelyn, the oilcloth wrapping pale in the faint starlight filtering through the overhang. Thomas Carter had spent 4 years on that, had died for it. Had trusted his daughter to carry it the rest of the way. Cole thought about what Evelyn had said that morning. My father was not a man who gave up on things, neither was Cole Walker. He just hadn't known it in a while. Morning came gray and cold, and Cole woke Evelyn before the light was full. She sat up with the knife already in her hand and her eyes already open, which told him she hadn't slept as deeply as he'd thought. How far to the east cutoff, she asked, no preamble. Just the mission, 3 miles, maybe 4. He handed her the canteen. Should reach the north road by mid-morning, and Vale will be at Colby Station. If he made it, if his horses held up. Cole looked at the drainage below. And if we're right about the cutoff? We're right, she said. Not arrogant, certain. The drainage bends northeast. I could hear it shift direction in the night. Cole looked at her. Some of it. She met his eyes. You were too. The whole time. I sleep light, he said. Me too. She stood, tucked the knife, picked up the satchel. At least we have that in common. Something about that sentence, the dryness of it, the small rye quality of it. Delivered at 5 in the morning on the side of a mountain, by a woman running for her life, hit Cole in the chest in a way that was entirely inconvenient and entirely real. He picked up his rifle and followed her down to the drainage. They came out on the north road at mid-morning, 2 miles east of Colby Station. Cole stopped at the road edge and studied the ground. Fresh horse tracks from the west, at least 4 horses, heavy riders, moving fast. Coming in from the valley road. The tracks turned east at the crossroads, heading toward Colby Station. There, Cole said, waiting. Evelyn looked east, down the road. What's east of the station? Pine Flat, small settlement. Mostly miners, he thought. Stage line runs through Pine Flat on its way to Denver. E's and Fridays. What day is it? Cole counted back. Friday. Evelyn turned and looked at him. The stage, she said. If it hasn't already come through. If it comes through before Vale realizes we bypassed the station. Sir Cole looked east. Pine Flat is 6 miles. We run, she said. They ran. Not a sprint, a steady, ground-eating pace. The kind that burns but doesn't break. The kind that covers distance without destroying the person covering it. Cole matched his pace to Evelyn's, which was faster than he'd expected. She was long-legged and determined, and she ran like someone who had decided that the road between here and Pine Flat was the only thing that existed in the world right now. Cole watched their back trail as they ran. A mile out from the station, he saw the dust. A single rider, coming east from the direction of Colby Station. Moving fast. "We've been made," he said. Evelyn didn't look back. "How far to Pine Flat?" "4 miles. Can we make it?" Rider was gaining. One horse against 2 legs, no. Not on open road. Cole looked at the terrain. The road cut between 2 ridges here, with a slope rising sharp to the left and a drop to a creek bed on the right. In the creek bed, if yards down, the willows were thick enough to hide a building, let alone 2 people. "Down," he said. She followed him off the road and down the creek bank without a word, and they dropped into the willow growth and went still and low and close to the water. Cole had his rifle up. Evelyn pressed herself behind the widest willow trunk and held the satchel flat against her chest and waited. Ryder came fast along the road above them. Cole looked up through the willows. It wasn't one of Vale's hired men. It was a boy, or teen, maybe 15, on a spotted pony, riding hard and scared, holding onto the saddle horn with one hand and waving something white with the other. Cole was on his feet before he thought about it. "Hey," he called out. "Oi." The pony shied hard at his sudden appearance from the creek bank. It almost came off, but grabbed the horn and steadied and looked down at Cole with eyes that were very large and very frightened. "Mr. U. Cole Walker." Cole went still. "Who's asking?" "Abe Colton sent me." The boy was breathing hard. "He said to find you before Vale's men did." Said to swallowed. "Said to tell you the stage was held at Pine Flat. Driver had a busted wheel. They've been fixing it since this morning. It leaves at noon." The boy looked at the sky. "It's near 11 now." Evelyn had come up out of the creek bed. She was standing beside Cole with mud on her skirt hem and her hair half down, and she looked at the boy with an expression that might have been the beginning of hope and was trying not to be, because hope at this point was a dangerous luxury. "Colton knew about the stage?" Cole said. "He knew about everything." The boy reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "I also said to give you this. Said you'd know what it meant." Cole took the paper, opened it. It was a short note. "Colton's careful handwriting. Vale's man talked at my post last night. Loose lips. They don't know about the east route, but they will figure it out by noon. Of one window. Use it." AC folded the note and looked at Evelyn. 4 miles, she said. "In an hour." "And we." Cole looked at the boy on the spotted pony. "Son, how fast is that horse?" The boy sat up a little straighter. "Fast enough. Can she carry double?" "Reckon she can carry most anything I ask her to." "Evelyn, you ride?" "Since I was 7. "A horse," Cole said. "Ride ahead and hold that stage. Tell the driver, there's a federal document delivery. Tell him whatever you have to tell him. Just keep that stage from leaving." Evelyn stared at him. "And you?" "I'll run 4 miles in an hour." "I've done worse." He looked at her directly. "The documents need to get on that stage. If Vale's men come up the road behind us, I can slow them down. You can't fight and carry the satchel both." He held her eyes. "You know I'm right." The expression on her face was complicated and real and human in a way that cut right through every wall she kept up. "You don't like this," she said. "I know. If something happens to you, then the documents still get to Denver and Harrison Vale still loses everything, and that's what your father wanted." He said it plainly, without dramatics, because it was true. "Go, now." She grabbed the front of his coat with one hand. "Yeah." For a moment he thought she was going to say something. She didn't. Looked at him. Really looked at him, the way people look when they're trying to fix something in memory. And then she let go, and she was up on the spotted pony before the boy had finished sliding off, satchel secure across her chest. And the pony was moving east at a full gallop before Cole had taken his next breath. Watched her go for exactly 2 seconds, then he ran. Yeah. The 4 miles were the hardest 4 miles of Cole Walker's life, and that was saying something, because he had a long list to compare them against. He ran on the road for the first mile, then heard hooves behind him, 2 riders, coming fast from the west, and he cut off the road and into the pine tree line and ran parallel, which was slower but kept him out of sight. His lungs were burning. His legs were operating on something beyond physical reserves, something that didn't have a clean name. Thought about Evelyn on the spotted pony. He ran faster. He came out of the trees above Pine Flat with 15 minutes to spare, according to the sun, and came down the slope at a controlled fall that turned into a run at the bottom. And he came into the small settlement's main street, breathing like a man who had recently decided that breathing was worth fighting for. The stage was there. Still there. Evelyn was standing beside it, talking to the driver with the intensity of someone who's out of patience for any conversation that doesn't end with the answers she needs. The driver was a heavy-set man with a gray beard and the particular expression of someone who has been talked at without pulse for the last 10 minutes, and is only partially winning the argument. Neil walked up. The driver looked at him, looked at the state of him, the sweat, the mud, the hard breathing, the rifle in his hand. "You mentioned?" The driver said to Evelyn. "Yes," Evelyn said, "this is him, the one carrying federal documents." "We're delivering federal documents," Evelyn said. "Which I have already explained." The driver looked at Cole for a long moment. "You look like a man being chased." "I am a man being chased," Cole said. "By the same people who want those documents destroyed. Which means the faster this stage moves east toward Denver, the better it'll be for everyone on it." It was quiet. Then he said, "I got 4 other passengers." "Then they'll have an interesting story to tell." A long pause. Driver looked east, looked west, looked at Evelyn, then at Cole. He said. The stage moved east out of Pine Flat at a pace that Cole considered insufficient and had no power to change. He sat across from Evelyn in the rocking interior, the satchel between them on the bench, and watched the window for riders. The other 4 passengers, a merchant, his wife, an elderly pastor, and a young man who looked like a clerk, watched Cole and Evelyn with the wary curiosity of people who had boarded a stage for a routine journey, and were beginning to suspect it had become something else. Pastor cleared his throat. "Are we in danger, son?" Cole looked at him. "There's a possibility." The merchant's wife made a sound. Her husband put his hand over hers. "What kind of possibility?" the clerk said. "The kinding a man with significant financial political interests who does not want those." Cole gestured at the satchel. "Delivered to Denver." "Land fraud," Evelyn said clearly, looking at the other passengers. "My father spent 4 years documenting it. 6 families lost their land. 2 men lost their lives." She held the pastor's eyes. "These documents go to the federal land commissioner in Denver, and Harrison Vale answers for all of it." Pastor looked at her for a long moment. "Harrison Vale," he said slowly. "Of Raven Creek. You know him?" Cole said. "I know of him." The old man's jaw tightened in a way that suggested the knowledge was not favorable. "I served a congregation in Millhaven for 3 years. Neil ran a similar operation there, before he moved to Raven Creek. A family named Oaks lost their property. They had 5 children." He was quiet for a moment. "I always wondered if someone would eventually stop him." Looked at Evelyn. She looked at Cole. "Someone is," Cole said. Pastor nodded once. "Then I will pray that this stage is faster than the men behind it." He folded his hands and closed his eyes, and Cole turned back to the window. Outside, the pines moved past, and the road unwound east toward Denver, and, for the next 2 hours, nothing came up behind them. Cole did not relax. He had learned a long time ago that the moments of apparent safety were not safety. They were intervals. The interval ended when the driver shouted from the box above. Cole had the window down before the shout finished. Behind them, half a mile back, riding hard. "Vale's men," Evelyn said. She was already at the other window. "Or Vale himself," Cole said. He looked at the road ahead. At the terrain. At the options which were narrowing. Merchant leaned forward. "What do we do?" Cole looked at Evelyn. She looked at him. In the space of that look, they had a conversation that contained no words and required none. Stay down, Cole said to the passengers. All of you. Below the window line, he checked his rifle. Evelyn reached into the satchel and came out with a small pistol, a ginger-inch, single shot, which Cole had not known she had, and which she handled with the ease of someone who was not new to it. He looked at the Derringer. My father's, she said. Last resort. Let's hope it stays a last resort. Riders were gaining. 400 yards. 300. The stage hit a rut and rocked hard, and the clerk made a noise, and the merchant pressed her face against her husband's shoulder. Cole had his rifle out the window. The lead rider pulled up suddenly. 200 yards back, not stopping reading the rifle barrel pointing at him from the stage window. They held there, the three riders in the stage, in that suspended moment of mutual calculation. Cole could see the lead rider's face at this distance, just enough to see it wasn't Cutter. Cutter was still on the mountain somewhere. This was someone else, someone who had the look of a man weighing odds. Don't, Cole said, though the rider couldn't hear him. He kept the rifle steady. It's not worth it. You know it's not worth it. The lead rider looked at the rifle, looked at the stage moving away from him, looked at the two riders flanking him, who were looking at him waiting for a decision. He pulled his horse up short. The stage rolled east. The three riders stayed where they were, shrinking in the distance, and then the road curved and they disappeared entirely. Cole kept the rifle at the window for another full minute. Then he pulled it in and sat back. The clerk let out a shaking breath. They gone for now, Cole said. Will they come back? Cole looked at Evelyn. She was holding her father's Derringer in her lap, looking at the satchel, her expression somewhere between relief and something fiercer. Something that had been waiting a long time to be expressed and was only now allowing itself to exist. Go back to Vale, she said, and Vale will know the stage reached the road. He'll know the documents are moving. She paused. He'll ride for Denver himself. He won't make it in time, Cole said. You don't know that. No, he said. But I know Commissioner Harris gets those documents today. And once a federal commissioner has them in hand, there's nothing Vale can do to make them disappear. He looked at her directly. It's over, Evelyn. He doesn't know that yet, but it's over. She stared at him. Her hands were still, the Derringer steady in her lap, but her face was doing something she didn't entirely have control of. My father, she started. I know, Cole said. He should be here. No, the stage rolled on. The pastor was still praying, quietly, lips moving. Outside, the Colorado mountains spread wide on either side of the road, vast and indifferent, and beautiful the way things are beautiful when they're too big to care about you. Evelyn looked out the window. Cole watched her face. There were things in it that he recognized the way you recognize a country you've never been to, but heard described so many times it feels familiar. The grief that doesn't announce itself. The exhaustion that is bigger than physical. The particular expression of someone who has been holding a weight so long that the prospect of setting it down doesn't feel like relief yet, just strange. Just frighteningly light. Cole, she said, still looking out the window. Yeah, when this is over, she paused. When we get to Denver and the documents are delivered and it's finished. Another pause. Next. He thought about the cabin on the North Ridge. Collapsed back room. The repaired hinge that Evelyn had found in the debris and handed to him without being asked. The apple tree on the south slope, half wild, still putting out leaves. He thought about what it felt like to work beside someone who worked without needing to be asked. I reckon I go back, he said. She turned from the window. To the cabin, he said. The one with half a roof. Roof's mostly fixed now. Needs the east window glass replaced. Backroom floor still needs work. She held his gaze. Something moved across her face that she was not quite hiding. That's a lot of work for one man, she said. It is, Cole agreed. The stage rolled east. The mountains held their silence around them, and Harrison Vale was somewhere behind on the road. Riding hard with cold eyes and a desperate man's calculations running through his head, and none of that mattered yet. What mattered was the satchel between them. Mattered was Denver, and one honest federal commissioner, and 4 years of Thomas Carter's careful, meticulous, courageous work finally arriving where it was always meant to go. Cole Walker looked out the window at the mountains he knew better than any place on earth, and felt something that was not quite peace but was the shape of it. Close enough for now, close enough. The federal land office in Denver smelled like old paper and lamp oil and the particular mustiness of a building where important decisions had been made for so long that the weight of them had settled into the walls. Commissioner James Harris was a small man with a large desk and the kind of eyes that had seen enough lies to recognize truth when it walked through the door. He was 53 years old, had served the federal land office for 19 years, and had a reputation in Colorado territorial circles for being the one official in the mountain region who could not be bought, threatened, or reasoned out of his integrity. Thomas Carter had known that, had spent 4 years counting on it. Harris looked up when Cole and Evelyn walked through his office door without knocking, which was technically an intrusion, but which Harris, to his credit, did not lead with. He looked at Evelyn first, at the torn dress and the dried mud and the face that had been through something significant, and then at Cole, who was standing half a step behind her, with a rifle he hadn't put down spine flat and the expression of a man who would not be leaving until he was certain this was finished. "Miss Carter," Harris said. He stood. He knew her name, which meant Colton's letter had arrived ahead of them, which meant the old man had sent it by some faster means than the stage. "I received correspondence this morning. I was wondering when you'd arrive." Commissioner Harris. Evelyn set the satchel on his desk. Her hands were steady, her voice was steady. Only the set of her jaw told Cole what this moment was costing her. "My father's name was Thomas Carter. He spent 4 years building this case." "I know his name," Harris said quietly. "I knew him. We corresponded." He looked at the satchel. "I was deeply sorry to hear what happened." A pause. Evelyn nodded once and not speak. "May I?" Harris gestured at the satchel. She unclipped the brass clasp herself and opened it and stepped back. Harris sat down and began reading. The room was quiet for a very long time. Cole stood by the door with his rifle and said nothing. Evelyn stood in front of the desk and said nothing. The lamp on Harris's desk burned steady. Outside the window, Denver went about its business, horses on the street, voices, an ordinary sound of a city that did not know and did not care what was happening in this office. Harris read for 20 minutes without looking up. When he finally set the last page down, his face had changed. Not dramatically, but Cole was watching closely and he saw the particular tightening around the eyes of a man who has just confirmed something he hoped was true and dreaded confirming at the same time. "This is sufficient," Harris said. "More than sufficient." He looked at Evelyn. "Your father was meticulous." "Yes," she said, "he was." "I can convene a federal investigation within the week. The territorial court will have grounds for immediate judgment on all of Vale's land holdings pending the investigation outcome." He paused. "County clerk, a man named Bauer?" "Yes. His signature appears on 14 of the fraudulent survey records. He'll be facing federal charges alongside Vale." Harris looked at the pages again. "This doesn't just end Vale's operation, Miss Carter. Endo's 6 years of it. Every family displaced, every acre stolen. The evidentiary record for restoring those holdings is in this satchel." Evelyn pressed her lips together, held herself very still. "And my father's work was enough," she said. "His work," Harris said carefully, "was exceptional." Something in Evelyn Carter's face broke, just slightly, and then came back together. Because she had learned in the last 3 weeks that grief did not wait for convenient moments, and the only thing to do was let it move through you and keep standing. Cole looked away from her face. He looked at the window. He gave her the privacy of not being watched. Harris was already reaching for his pen. They were on the street outside the federal building when Evelyn stopped walking. Cole stopped beside her. She was looking at nothing in particular: the street, the horses, the ordinary afternoon of a city that was carrying on without any awareness of what had just happened inside that building. She had the empty satchel in her hands, the oilcloth wrapping gone, the leather soft and worn. Her father's satchel. He never got to see it, she said. Cole didn't try to answer that. There was no answer that improved on the truth of it. He would have stood in that office, Aiden, she said, and he would have watched Harris read every page, and he would not have said a word until it was over. And then he would have shaken the man's hand and walked out, and found the nearest bench and sat down and cried. She paused. He was not a man who cried easily, but he would have for that. Cole stood beside her and said nothing, and let her have the moment. After a while she said thank you. He looked at her. For coming back at the boulders, she said. For the roof. 4 miles, she held his gaze. For all of it. You would have made it without me, he said. Maybe. She looked at the satchel. I'm glad I didn't have to find out. A wagon rolled past on the street. A dog barked somewhere. The afternoon sun was the particular gold of late summer, and it caught in Evelyn Carter's reddish-brown hair, and Cole Walker noticed this and looked away. What happens now, he said practically, because practicality was safer. Harris will send federal marshals to Raven Creek. Probably within the week. She straightened, pulled herself back into the present. Vale will be arrested. Bauer the clerk too. The investigation will take months, but the injunction is immediate. Vale can't transfer or sell any of the contested properties while it's pending. She paused. Families get notified. The Oaks family the pastor mentioned. Others. And you? She looked at him. What about me? You've got no homestead. Vale burned it. He said it plainly because she already knew it, and dancing around it didn't help either of them. What are you going to do? Evelyn Carter looked at the street for a long moment. I don't know, she said. And then, more quietly, that's the first time in 3 weeks I've been able to say that. I don't know. I've been so focused on the one thing that I didn't think past it. That's not a bad place to be, Cole said, past it. She looked at him sideways to smile. No, she said. I suppose it isn't. They stayed in Denver 2 nights. Harris arranged modest accommodations, a boarding house 2 streets from the federal office, clean and quiet, run by a widow named Mrs. Albright, who fed them without asking questions, and seemed to understand instinctively that some guests arrived carrying more than luggage. The first night, Cole slept for 9 hours without waking, which was the longest uninterrupted sleep he'd had in years. He woke at dawn with the unfamiliar feeling of having actually rested and lay there for a moment trying to identify what was different before he figured it out. The second morning, Harris called them back to the office. He had news that changed the shape of everything. Vale arrived in Denver last night, Harris said. Cole went still. He came directly to this office, Harris continued. This morning, before I arrived, he was here when I got in. With a lawyer. Harris's expression was measured and dry in equal parts. He had a counter-argument prepared. He claimed the documents were forgeries. He claimed Miss Carter had manufactured evidence in a scheme to defraud him of legitimate holdings. Evelyn's jaw tightened. I know, Harris said, holding up one hand. He also made certain implied suggestions about what continued cooperation with my office might be worth to my personal finances. He let that sentence sit for a moment. I want you to know that I find such suggestions deeply clarifying. They tend to confirm rather than complicate the decision I've already made. Cole looked at Harris. What decision? I've already sent for the territorial marshals, Harris said. Dale is currently in a meeting with his lawyer 2 floors below us, under the impression that he's negotiating. He is not negotiating. Harris picked up a pen and signed the bottom of a document on his desk with efficient strokes. Cole understood. You're arresting him today. The marshals will arrive within the hour. Harris looked at Evelyn. I want you to know, Miss Carter, nothing Vale said this morning changed the evidentiary weight of your father's documents by a single degree. They are what they are, airtight, as you said. He paused. Your father was not just meticulous. He was brilliant. He anticipated exactly this, that Vale would claim forgery. No, he built redundancy into the record, multiple witnesses to the same facts. Cross-reference dates. Original survey records aimed from the Territorial Archive directly, with archive stamps still on them. Harris almost smiled. Vale's lawyer went very quiet when I pointed that out. Evelyn sat very still in her chair. He planned for this, she said. He planned for all of it. Harris set down the pen. He just didn't plan on not being here to see it. Room was quiet. Cole watched Evelyn absorb this. Watched her process the particular complicated grief of learning that your father's love for you was so large it included planning for his own absence. He watched her hold that and not break under it, the way she held everything straight-backed and clear-eyed and with a jaw that didn't tremble, even when everything behind her eyes was doing exactly that. He had never in his life admired anyone more. The sound of boots on the stairs outside the office door broke the silence. Territorial marshals, badges out, came through the door and nodded at Harris. Harris nodded back. "Gentlemen," he said, "the man you want is 2 floors below." They went. Cole and Evelyn were on the street when they heard it. Not a commotion exactly, more like the particular sound of a situation resolving itself with authority. Raised voices, brief, then quiet. Then boots on the boardwalk, the marshals coming out of the federal building's front door with Harris and Vale between them. Vale looked different out here in the open. Smaller, somehow, than the figure who had ridden the Valley Road with such absolute possession of his own authority. Suit was still good, the bearing was still there. Some of it a man like Vale didn't lose that all at once. But the calculation in his eyes had shifted into something else. Something Cole recognized. The dawning understanding that the thing you built your certainty on was not as solid as you believe. Vale saw Evelyn on the street. He stopped walking, or tried to. The marshals didn't stop, so it became a stumble, a disruption of dignity, which Cole suspected was more damaging to a man like Vale than any of the rest of it. Vale said. Evelyn looked at him. She didn't move. She didn't step back. She stood on the Denver street in her torn and mended dress with her father's empty satchel in her hand, and she looked at Harrison Vale the way a woman looks at something that has cost her everything and is only now getting what it deserved. She didn't say a word. That silence was more than any sentence she could have spoken, and Cole thought Vale felt it from the way the man's face changed. The marshals moved him on. Cole watched until they turned the corner. Then he looked at Evelyn. Her eyes were bright. She blinked once, twice, and then she turned away from the direction Vale had gone and looked at Cole. And there was so much in her face, grief and relief and exhaustion, and something that was only beginning to become the kind of thing a person can live on, that Cole had to resist the urge to say something that would have been entirely inadequate. Instead, he said, "You hungry?" She blinked at him. Then she laughed, a short, startled sound, real and involuntary, the first laugh he'd heard from her. "Yes," she said. "Actually, yes, I'm starving. There's a place on the next block." Pastor on the stage mentioned it before he got off. "You're taking restaurant recommendations from a pastor you met on a stagecoach." Man seemed to know what he was talking about. She shook her head, still with the remnant of that laugh on her face, and they walked down the Denver street together in the afternoon sun, and Cole Walker thought, this exact thing right here, without knowing exactly what he meant by it. Ride back to Raven Creek took 4 days by hired horse. They didn't rush, not because there was no reason to get back, but because somewhere in the rhythm of the trail, the mountain mornings, the creek crossings, the hours of easy quiet and occasional conversation, something was happening that neither of them was in a hurry to end. They talked more on that trail than Cole had talked to another person in 3 years combined. Not about big things mostly, about small ones, about what his mother had grown in her garden in Missouri back before the war. About Evelyn's father teaching her to navigate by stars when she was 9 years old, and she'd thought it was the most useful thing she'd ever been taught. About horses, which Cole knew extensively, and mending, which Evelyn knew extensively, and the surprising overlap between the two when it came to patience. About the time Cole had gotten himself thoroughly lost on the San Juan Ridge for 2 days and survived on creek water and raw pine nuts and arrived at the next settlement looking, by his own account, like something that had been assembled wrong. Evelyn had laughed at that story for longer than the story probably warranted. Cole had let her laugh and looked at the trail ahead and felt something unlocking in his chest that he was fairly certain had been locked for 3 years. On the third night, camped beside a creek that ran fast and cold over smooth stones, Evelyn said, "Tell me about Marcus." Cole looked at the fire, a long silence. "You don't have to," she said. I've heard you say his name twice in your sleep. And I figure whatever it is, it's part of why you bought that cabin." Cole was quiet for a long time, long enough that the fire crackled and shifted and the creek ran on. "He was my partner," Cole said finally, "for the supply wagon work. 7 years. We'd crossed every major mountain pass in Colorado between us." He paused. 3 years ago, we were running a contract through the North Pass supplies for a mining operation. Winter crossing. I had the weather read wrong. I knew it was marginal and I said it was passable. He stopped. Evelyn waited. "The pass closed on us in the middle of the crossing," Cole said. "Not a slow build, a fast storm. We had 4 men and a loaded wagon and nowhere to go." He looked at the fire. "I got 3 of them out, dug a snow trench, waited it out. But Marcus," he stopped again. "Marcus went back for the wagon. Said the supplies were contracted and he wasn't leaving them." A pause. It was Marcus. Stubborn past the point of reason sometimes. He said it with the particular inflection of someone who had said the same sentence with affection for years and now said it with grief. He didn't make it back from the wagon. The fire crackled. "It wasn't your fault," Evelyn said. "I had the weather read wrong." "You're not God," she said. "Weather in the Colorado mountains in winter doesn't answer to anybody's read." "Not anybody's." She held his gaze steadily. "Marcus made his own choice about the wagon. You know that. Knowing it and living with it are different things." She said, "They are." A pause. "My father made his own choice too. He knew what Vail was. He knew the risk. He gathered that evidence anyway for 4 years." Her voice was even. "I've spent 3 weeks trying to decide if I could have stopped him. If I should have tried harder to make him see the danger." She looked at the fire. "I've decided that it's not my burden to carry. It's my burden to carry what he left me to carry, and I did that. And you did yours. You got your men out. 3 of 4 is not failure, Cole." "It just doesn't feel that way." Cole looked at her across the fire. He didn't say anything. She didn't look away. There was something between them in that moment that had been building since a dark cabin and a woman with a knife and a man who could have left and didn't, something that lived in the quiet things, in the work done side by side, in the laughter on the Denver street, in 4 days on the trail where neither of them had to explain themselves to the other. Cole Walker was not a man who named things before they were ready to be named. But he felt it. He was fairly certain she felt it too. "Get some sleep," he said. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she laid down on her bedroll and looked up at the stars and said, half to herself, "Your navigation instincts are good, even with the weather read." He almost smiled. "High praise," he said. "Don't push it." Raven Creek looked different when they rode in. Or maybe Cole was looking at it differently, which came to the same thing. He'd been through 100 towns like it, the main street, with its line of false front buildings, the hitching posts and the water trough, and the particular smell of horses and sawdust and cook smoke. He'd ridden through without 18-2's stopped only because dispatch through a shoe, had bought a deed on a ruin as an afterthought and ridden back out. Now he rode in beside Evelyn Carter, and people on the street turned to look. Not hostile looking. More like the way people look when something they expected to stay small has come back bigger. New. Word had reached Raven Creek before them. The territorial marshals that Harris had sent moved fast, and Vail's arrest in Denver had been followed within 3 days by the arrival of a federal investigator in Raven Creek. New. who had found County Clerk Bauer in his office and escorted him out of it with considerably less dignity than Vale had been afforded. The investigation was open. The injunction was in place. Everyone in Raven Creek knew it. Gerald Birch, the feed store man who had followed Cole to the smithy on the first day and given him the history of the cursed cabin, was stanza and of his Cole and Evelyn rode past. He looked at Cole, he looked at Evelyn, he took his hat off. It was a small gesture. Cole almost rode past it, but a man taking his hat off on the street to a woman who had come back from the mountain that everyone said she'd never come back, carrying documents that had started bringing down the most powerful man in the county, that was not a small thing. What is a small gesture? At him, Birch nodded back. They rode to Abe Colton's supply post. The old man was outside before they'd tied the horses, moving faster than Cole would have credited him, and he went straight to Evelyn and took both her hands in his and looked at her face for a long moment without speaking. The eyes were wet. "You made it," Colton said. "We made it," she said. He looked at Cole over Evelyn's shoulder. "Harris got the documents." "Jail. Arrested in Denver. Federal charges." Cole paused. "Your letter was there ahead of us. It helped." Colton shook his head slowly. "Waited 6 years to write that letter. Felt like nothing when I was writing it." He looked at Evelyn again. "Your father would have known," she said. "I know Abe." The old man took a breath, steadied himself, let go of her hands but kept the closeness. "There are families coming in," he said. "I've already had 3 messages. Oak's family, they heard about the injunction. They're asking about their land. And the Brennan family, the ones from the east parcel, they've been living with relatives in Pueblo for 2 years. Waiting." He looked at Cole and Evelyn both. "Harris is going to need testimony. You, from me, from everyone who can put facts to paper." "We'll give it," Evelyn said. Cole said nothing, but his silence was the agreeing kind. Itten looked at Dispatch, there at the rail, the big bay gelding that had spent 2 weeks eating well in Colton's back corral and was looking significantly better rested than his owner. "Your horse missed you," Colton said. "Horse doesn't miss people," Cole said. "This one does." Colton almost smiled. He bit Doyle when Doyle tried to saddle him 2 days ago. "Works for me." Doyle didn't deserve it. A pause. "I appreciated the sentiment." Cole looked at Dispatch. The horse turned and looked back at him with the self-satisfied expression of an animal that knew exactly what it had done. "Apology for Dispatch," Cole said. "No, you're not," Colton said. "No," Cole agreed. "I'm not." The federal investigator, a man named Sergeant Aldous Webb, who had been sent by Harris directly, had set up a temporary office in the back room of the Raven Creek courthouse, which was poetic in the way that useful things often are. He interviewed Cole the next morning, and Evelyn the morning after that, and took written testimony from Abe Colton, and sent requests for statements to Pine Flat and Millhaven, and 2 other towns where Vale's history of land manipulation had left traces. Ole sat in that courthouse and answered Webb's questions with the plain directness of a man who had never learned to dress up the truth, and he watched Webb write it down. And he thought about Thomas Carter sitting in a room, not unlike this one, maybe this very room 4 years ago, beginning the slow, careful work of building a case that he never got to see finish. He thought about what meant to carry a thing forward when the person who started it couldn't. He thought about Evelyn. After the testimony, Cole walked out of the courthouse and found the town of Raven Creek doing something he hadn't seen it do before. The kind of thing that happens when a weight has been lifted that people have been carrying so long they forgot it was there. People were talking in the street, not the wary, keep your voice down, talking of a town under the thumb of a powerful man. Talking the way people talk when they have things to say that they've been holding back. He passed 2 men arguing about the Brennan family's land claim, with the energy of people who had opinions and were finally able to express them. He passed a woman telling another woman with considerable feeling that she had known for 3 years that Bauer the clerk was crooked but hadn't been able to say so out loud. Harlan Pruitt, the auctioneer, was standing outside the courthouse as Cole came down the steps. He looked at Cole. He had the expression of a man assembling an apology that he hadn't built before and wasn't sure of the construction. "Walker," he said. "That cabin," Pruitt said. "Dollar you paid." He paused. "You did," Cole agreed. It was wrong to boo. Cole looked at him. Pruitt was not a bad man, just a man who had been comfortable at a thing that seemed safe to laugh at, which was its own kind of failure but not the unforgivable kind. "You were," Cole said, "but you're not wrong now." He tipped his head. "I'd call it even." Pruitt looked relieved in the way a person does when they've been let off lighter than they deserved. Walked on. He rode up to the cabin that afternoon. Alone. Evelyn was still in town. She had meetings with Webb, and then with a lawyer Harris had recommended, and then with the Oaks family who had arrived that morning from their relative's home in Salida. He had things to do, people who needed her. Cole understood that and didn't say otherwise. He tied Dispatch to the pine and walked to the cabin and pushed the door open. It was as he'd left it, mostly. The roof patch was holding no rain had gotten through in the weeks they'd been gone, which Evelyn had predicted correctly. The east window was still glassless. The back room floor still needed work. The iron pot was still by the hearth. But the place smelled different than it had the first time he'd pushed this door open. Not better, exactly, just different, less like abandonment. More like something that had been waiting. He walked to the east window and looked out at the ridge. The afternoon light was coming across the valley the way it always came at this hour, slant and gold, the way summer light gets when August is thinking about becoming September. The apple tree on the south slope was still out there, half wild, still standing. Still putting out leaves. Cole stood at the east window for a long time. He thought about Marcus. He thought about what Evelyn had said by the fire. 3 or 4 is not failure. It just doesn't feel that way. He thought about the fact that he had lived in other men's spaces for 12 years. Had moved through the world like a man who had lost the right to occupy any permanent point in it, moving because moving was easier than stopping, because stopping meant the thing you were running from had a fixed target. He thought about a dollar and a deed, and a woman with a knife who lowered it. He picked up the hammer he'd left against the hearth wall. He went to work on the back room floor. He was still working when he heard footsteps on the broken porch, careful footsteps, weight tested before it was committed, and then Evelyn Carter came through the door. She stopped when she saw him. He stopped. "I thought you had meetings," he said. "I did. I finished them." She looked at the back room. At the floorboards he'd already pulled and restacked. "You started without me. Figured I'd get the worst boards up." She looked at the stack. Then she looked at him. "Those aren't the worst boards. Those are the good ones you're saving." He looked at the stack. "No," he said. "You were waiting." "Nettie." He looked at her. The afternoon light came through the east window the way it always did, and it was warm and particular, and it caught the red in her hair, and Cole Walker was 38 years old and had been alone for a very long time, and he was done with pretending that the thing happening in his chest was anything other than what it was. "Yeah," he said. "I was waiting." Evelyn Carter looked at him for a long, full moment. Then she picked up the second hammer from the floor he'd brought 2, and they both knew he'd brought 2 on purpose, and said, "Then let's get to it." And they went to work, outside. The apple tree on the south slope stood in the August light, and the mountains held their silence, and somewhere down in the valley, Harrison Vale's empire was being carefully, and methodically, and permanently dismantled by the paper trail that Thomas Carter had spent 4 years building, and his daughter had carried across a mountain range at knife point. And in a cabin on the North Ridge, 2 people who had each been certain they would always be alone worked side by side on a floor that needed fixing, in a building that needed more work than either of them could count. In a place that the whole town of Raven Creek had called worthless and cursed and belonging to the dead. It did not feel cursed. It felt, for the first time in a long time, like something worth coming back to. Federal investigation moved faster than anyone in Raven Creek expected. Commissioner Harris was not a man who let momentum die once he had it. Within 10 days of Vale's arrest in Denver, Sergeant Webb had compiled testimony from 14 witnesses across 4 counties. Within 2 weeks, the territorial court had issued a ruling on the injunction that nobody in Vale's legal circle managed to contest effectively, because Thomas Carter had been too thorough and too careful, and had anticipated every counter-argument before any lawyer thought to make it. Within 3 weeks, the first land restoration order came through. The Oaks family got their property back on a Tuesday morning. Webb read the order aloud in the Raven Creek courthouse, with a small audience watching the Oaks family themselves, Abe Colton, Evelyn, Cole, and about a dozen townspeople who had walked in because the door was open and they wanted to see what justice looked like up close. It looked like a thin man named Henry Oaks, standing in the back of the courthouse, with his hat in his hands and his wife beside him and his 3 grown children behind him. And when Webb finished reading the legal language and said, "Mr. Oaks, the contested parcel is restored to your original deed," Henry Oaks nodded once, very slowly, and his wife put her face against his shoulder, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then Henry Oaks looked up and said, in a voice that was working hard to stay level, "My father built the first fence on that land in 1861. I always figured someday it would come back." Nobody in the courthouse spoke. Cole stood at the back wall with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, and felt something move through him that was large and inconvenient and entirely real. At Evelyn. She was looking at Henry Oaks. Her expression was the expression of someone who has just watched the thing their father died for actually happen, in real time, in a real room, in front of real people. The expression of someone who has been carrying a weight so long that setting it down doesn't feel like relief immediately. It feels like vertigo, like the body adjusting to a new gravity. Her eyes were bright. She didn't cry, but Cole knew, from the set of her shoulders and the way she breathed through the next 30 seconds, exactly what that cost her. He moved through the small crowd to stand beside her. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, close enough that she could feel he was there, and that was all. After a moment, her hand found his arm, her fingers, pressing once, briefly, above his elbow. Same gesture she'd made on the Upper Pass Trail, in the aftermath of the gunshots. Understood what it meant now, better than he had then. Bauer, the county clerk, broke first. This was that nobody had fully anticipated, though Webb had hoped for it. Bauer was not, at his core, a brave man. He had gone along with Vale's scheme because Vale had made it clear that going along was safer than refusing, and because the money had been good. And because he had told himself for 6 years the particular lie that men tell themselves when they are doing wrong things for comprehensible reasons. It wasn't really his fault, that the machinery would have moved without him, that he was just a small gear in something larger. On the 22nd day of the investigation, Bauer asked for a meeting with Webb and spent 4 hours telling him everything. Not just the land fraud. Everything. The lawyer from Pueblo who had left town he hadn't left voluntarily. Vale had paid him a very significant sum to disappear, and had made clear what the alternative to disappearing was. The lawyer was alive, living in San Francisco under a different name. Webb sent a telegraph. The farmer named Breckett, whose accident with farm machinery had been recorded as accidental Bauer, knew 2 of the men involved. He gave their names, the records that had been backdated, the survey maps that had been falsified. The county archive that had been partially replaced. Bauer knew which documents were false and where the originals had been hidden, because Vale had been careful enough to keep the originals as insurance against his own people, which was the kind of careful that was also a confession. Webb sent for Cole and Evelyn the morning after Bauer's testimony. He sat across his desk from them and said, without preamble, Breckett's death is being reclassified as murder. 2 men Bauer named are being brought in. Vale faces an additional charge. He paused. The case against him just became significantly more serious than land fraud. He said nothing. Evelyn said, "My father suspected." About Breckett. He put it in the documents, the circumstantial case. He didn't have proof. He had enough to start the thread, Webb said. Bauer pulled it the rest of the way. He looked at her steadily. Miss Carter, your father built a case that is dismantling 6 years of systematic corruption, has restored land to at least 4 families with more restorations pending, and has now opened a murder investigation that will likely put Harrison Vale in a federal prison for the rest of his natural life. Webb was not a dramatic man, but something in his voice had changed. I have been doing this work for 11 years. I have never seen a private citizen's evidentiary record as complete or as consequential as what your father left behind. Evelyn was very still. He just wanted the land back, she said. That was all he wanted. He got that, Webb said. And more. The silence in the room was the kind that follows sentences that are too large for immediate response. Cole looked at Evelyn's profile. At the way she was sitting, straight-backed and composed, the way she always sat when something was hitting her, at a depth she wasn't going to show in public. He had learned to read the composure for what it covered. Mia. He had learned a lot of things about Evelyn Carter in the past month, and every one of them had added to the weight of what he felt when he looked at her, which was becoming difficult to mistake for anything other than what it was. What happens to Cutter? Practically. Because Cutter was still a loose end that lived in the back of his mind. Cutter was picked up 3 days ago, Webb said. He was trying to cross into New Mexico. He paused. He had a great deal to say once he understood that Vale was no longer in a position to protect him. Cole nodded. And Doyle? Evelyn asked. Doyle surrendered to the marshals voluntarily the day Vale was arrested in Denver. Webb allowed himself a small, dry expression. Apparently Doyle had been considering his options for some time. And Cole looked at Evelyn. She looked at Cole. Something passed between them, the specific really 2 people who have been watching their backs for a long time and have just been told they can stop. It was not a small thing. It felt like setting down a rifle you'd been holding for a month. The Brennan family came back from Pueblo on a Friday. And Cole watched them ride into Raven Creek from the cabin on the north ridge. He couldn't see the town from there, but he could see the valley road, and 4 wagons moving north on it in the early morning meant something significant. He knew who it was before he rode down to find out. Patrick Brennan was 51 years old, broad and weathered, with 2 sons who looked like copies of him, made in slightly better conditions. His wife, Margaret, sat on the first wagon seat and looked at the mountains, the way someone looks at a thing they thought they'd lost forever. Evelyn was already in town when Cole arrived. She had clearly been there since before dawn. She had a way of knowing when things were going to happen before they happened, which Cole had stopped being surprised by and started simply accounting for. She was talking to Margaret Brennan when Cole tied dispatch at the rail. Watched from across the street. He didn't go over. This was not his moment, it was theirs, and Evelyn's, and he understood the difference. Margaret Brennan was crying, not quietly, the kind of crying that has been waiting 2 years to happen, and is now happening all at once. Evelyn had the woman's hands in both of hers, and was talking to her steadily, and whatever she was saying, it was the right thing, because Margaret Brennan was crying and smiling at the same time. Which is the expression of someone who has been handed back something they'd stopped hoping for. Patrick Brennan caught Cole's eye from across the street. Walked over. He was not a man who wasted words. He looked at Cole for a moment, at the man who had come into Raven Creek on a Tuesday and bought a worthless deed for $1, and somehow come out the far side of everything as the person who had made all of this possible, not by being important, but by being present. Walker, Brennan said. I am. My land is back because of what you did. Cole shook his head. Your land is back because of what Thomas Carter did. I just made sure his daughter got to the right office. Was quiet for a moment. That's more than most men would have done. Maybe, Cole said. Or maybe it's just what any decent person would do if they were paying attention. Brennan looked at him. Then he put out his hand. Cole shook it. It was a firm handshake, the kind that says more than the words around it. Brennan went back to his family. Cole stood on the Raven Creek street in the September morning and watched a family getting back what they'd lost, and felt underneath everything. Underneath the quiet and the completion, and the particular satisfaction of a thing done right, a small, sharp grief for a man he'd never met. Thomas Carter, who had seen all of this clearly enough to document it, carefully enough to make it stick, and bravely enough to keep going when the cost was becoming visible. Thomas Carter, who deserved to be standing here. That evening, Cole and Evelyn sat on the repaired porch of the cabin and watched the sun go down over the valley. The porch had taken 4 days to fix properly. Cole had replaced every compromised board and rebuilt the support structure from the ground up, using timber from the collapsed back room that had turned out to be better quality than anything the lumber yard in Raven Creek was currently selling. Evelyn had pointed this out while he was working, which had led to a 20-minute conversation about timber grain that was, objectively, not a romantic conversation, and had felt like one anyway. The east window had new glass. Cole had ridden to town for it 2 weeks ago, and Evelyn had installed it while he was rebuilding the porch supports, and when he'd come back and seen it in place, clean glass, no cracks. Light coming through it the way light was supposed to come through a window. He had stood there longer than he meant to. The backroom floor was solid. The roof patch had held through 2 rainstorms and a night of wind that had rattled the pines for hours. The chimney drew clean. The apple tree on the south slope had been pruned. Evelyn had done it one morning, without announcing she was going to, and when Cole had come around the south side of the cabin and found her up a ladder with a handsaw, working through the dead wood, with the methodical focus she brought to everything, he had stood there watching her work for 30 seconds before she noticed him. "It'll produce better next year if the dead weight is off," she'd said, without looking up. "I know," he'd said. "Are you going to help or watch?" Yeah. He'd helped. Now they sat on the porch in the last of the September light, and neither of them was trying to fill the silence, because they had reached the point sometime in the last week, without marking the exact moment where between them was comfortable rather than tentative. The kind of quiet that grows between people who have been through something together and come out the other side and don't need to narrate it to know it happened. Evelyn had her legs stretched out in front of her and was holding a cup of coffee that was getting cold because she'd stopped drinking it in favor of thinking. Cole could tell when she was thinking hard because she went very still, the way she'd been still in the cabin that first night, crouched in the corner, except now the stillness was contemplative rather than defensive. The valley below had color in it. The aspens were starting to turn the first yellow edges of the season, showing up on the upper slopes like the first sentence of a story. "Webb sent word today," Evelyn said. Cole looked at her. The territorial court issued the final ruling on the Oaks property boundary dispute. Henry Oaks gets the full original parcel, plus documented damages for the 2 years he was unable to work the land. She paused. And the Millhaven families, the ones Vale ran off before Raven Creek. 3 families. Harris is extending the investigation there. She looked at the valley. My father documented those cases too, in the back section of the satchel. I almost didn't notice them. Harris noticed. Harris notices everything. It's going to take years to fully unwind what Vale did. Investigations, the restoration orders, the criminal proceedings. She was quiet for a moment. It's moving. Every week it's moving. Cole looked at the valley. Your father would have had opinions about the pace of it, he said. Something warm moved across her face. He would have been at Webb's door every morning, by 7 asking for an update and offering to help with the paperwork. She shook her head, smiling. He was not a patient man about things that mattered. Neither are you. She glanced at him sideways. Is that a criticism? No, he said, it's not. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the valley. Cole, she said. He waited. I've been thinking about the homestead land. She said it carefully, the way she said things she'd been sitting with for a while. My father's original parcel. Webb says the restoration order for it should come through within the month. It's mine legally, cleanly mine. She paused, but the house is gone. The apple trees are gone. Vale burned everything that was on it. You'd have to start over, Cole said. Yes, she was quiet. I've been thinking about whether that's something I want to do. Another pause. Over. On land that has that kind of history on it. Cole said nothing. He waited because he understood she wasn't finished. And I've been thinking, she said, about a man who bought a cabin for $1 because he wanted somewhere nobody could find him. She kept her eyes on the valley. And whether that man found what he was looking for. Evening light was going gold to amber. The aspens in the valley caught it and threw it back. Evelyn, Cole said. She turned and looked at him directly, which was how she did everything direct, clear, no performance of indirectness. I'm not asking you to make me a promise, she said. I know who you are. I know you don't make promises easily. And I'm not standing here needing to be rescued or settled or taken care of. I want to be clear about that. She held his eyes. I want to be equally clear about something else. She paused. The cabin needed 2 people to fix it. Not because one person couldn't have done the work, but because the work meant more with 2. Cole looked at her. He thought about everything that had happened in the 6 weeks since he'd pushed open a door and found a woman with a knife in the dark. He thought about what she'd said on the trail to Denver. I don't know. That's the first time in 3 weeks I've been able to say that. He thought about the fire on the 3rd night in Marcus and what she'd said, 3 of 4 is not failure. He thought about the apple tree, pruned and standing in the September light. He thought about a porch rebuilt from the ground up, and a window with new glass and a back room floor that was solid now, solid and real, and how none of it had been done alone. He thought about a man who had come to a mountain to disappear and had found, instead, that disappearing was not what he needed. What he'd needed was a reason to stay. I bought this cabin, Cole said slowly, because I wanted somewhere nobody could find me. Evelyn watched him. But you found me, he said, before I found myself. He looked at her steadily, with the full directness of a man who has earned the right to say something true and is choosing to say it. I'm not going anywhere, Evelyn. Not because I'm obligated. Not because you need me to stay. Because this, he looked at the cabin, the valley, the ridge, and then back at her, is the first place in 12 years that has felt like it was mine. He paused. Ours, if you want it that way. The silence that followed was the kind that has something large moving through it. Evelyn Carter looked at Cole Walker in the September light on a porch they'd rebuilt together, in front of a valley that was turning gold for the season. Her face did the thing it did when she was feeling something she didn't quite have armor for the real expression. The unguarded one, the one he'd first seen on the Denver street when she laughed and hadn't been expecting to. I want it that way, she said. It was simple. It was enough. Ole reached across the space between the chair and took her hand, and she let him, and they sat like that in the fading light and looked at the valley together. Territorial Court handed down Harrison Vale's sentence in November. Cole and Evelyn heard about it from Webb, who rode up to the cabin with the news on a cold, clear morning when the first snow had dusted the upper ridge and the apple tree on the south slope was bare and resting. 15 years federal prison. Land fraud, conspiracy, and 2 counts of facilitated murder for Brackett's death, and the circumstances of the lawyer from Pueblo, who had been located in San Francisco and had provided testimony that added 2 more nails to the case. County Clerk Bauer received 7 years, reduced for cooperation. Cutter received 5. Webb read the summary aloud, sitting at the repaired table in the cabin's front room, with coffee that Evelyn had made, and that was significantly better than anything Webb had had in the 3 months he'd been living out of Raven Creek's boarding house. When he finished reading, the room was quiet. Then Evelyn said, 7 families. Webb said, 7 families get their land back. I counted this morning. She looked at the paper in Webb's hand. I wanted to know the number before the ruling came through. She paused. My father would have wanted to know the number. Webb nodded slowly. And families.
Yes.
And the Millhaven cases, still pending. But the evidentiary record your father built covers 3 of the 4 Millhaven properties. Harris expects restorations within the year. Evelyn nodded. Nay. She was holding her coffee cup with both hands and looking at the table with the expression of someone doing arithmetic that isn't numerical. Counting something that doesn't have a unit. Cole watched her. "It's not enough," she said quietly, not bitterly. "Just honestly, it's never going to be fully enough. Years people lost. The things that were burned. The 2 men who died. I know that." "There's known that." "No," Webb said. "It's not enough for what was taken." He paused. "But it's what justice looks like when it works, which is more than it usually does." Evelyn considered that. "My father would have said the same thing," she said finally. In fewer words. Webb smiled, a small one, the expression of a man who had heard Thomas Carter described enough times now to have built a clear picture of him. "He sounds like he was a remarkable man. He was stubborn and meticulous and sometimes impossible," Evelyn said, and yes. "Able." She looked at Cole. He looked back. The cabin was warm. The fire was going. Outside, the first snow of the season lay on the upper ridge, and the aspens in the valley below had finished turning and were holding their yellow against the cold with the particular stubbornness of things that know they're about to let go but aren't ready yet. Ebb stood, gathered his papers, thanked them for the coffee. Muir Cole walked him to the door. Nay. At the threshold, Webb stopped and looked back at the cabin, the repaired porch, new the window glass, wood stacked neatly against the east wall. Then he looked at Cole. "You know," Webb said, "when Harris first told me about this case, about a woman on a mountain with a satchel full of documents, and a man who bought an abandoned cabin for $1, and somehow the 2 of them got those documents to Denver, I thought." Harris was embellishing. He looked at Cole steadily. Abel said, "No." Webb agreed. Put his hat on. "Good work, Mr. Walker." He rode down the south slope and Cole watched him go and then went back inside. Twist that Raven Creek hadn't anticipated the one that arrived quietly, the way real things often do, was Abe Colton. May. 3 days after Webb's visit, the old man came up the mountain on his mule with a wooden crate tied to the saddle and an expression that Cole couldn't immediately read. He set the crate on the porch table and looked at Evelyn. "Your father left something with me," he said. 8 years ago. Before things got bad. He said to hold it and give it to you when it was safe." He paused. "It's been safe for a while now. I just stopped. I wanted to wait until it felt right." Evelyn looked at the crate. She didn't open it immediately. She put both hands on the lid and stood there for a moment, and Cole saw her jaw work. Then she opened it. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were 3 things. A leather journal, Thomas Carter's handwriting on the cover, unmistakable. A packet of letters, tied with string, addressed to Evelyn in the same handwriting. And at the bottom, wrapped separately, a small framed photograph. Evelyn picked up the photograph. It was her parents. Younger than Evelyn was now. Standing in front of a fence line, squinting into the sun, with the self-conscious stiffness of people who didn't often have their photograph taken. Her father had his arm around her mother's shoulders. Her mother had been gone for 12 years. Evelyn stood on the porch of the North Ridge cabin and looked at the photograph for a long time. And Colton both said nothing. She set the photograph down carefully and picked up the packet of letters. The handwriting on the outside. For Evelyn, when it's over. Nay. She pressed the packet against her chest with both arms, the way she'd held the satchel on the mountain, the way she held things she intended to protect. "Knew," she said. Her voice was steady and quiet. "He knew he might not make it. He knew the risk," Colton said. "But he also knew what he was leaving behind." He paused. "He talked about you every time I saw him." He looked at her. "He was never afraid, Evelyn. He was sad about it." "Not afraid," she once firmly. "I know," she said. "I know he wasn't." She picked up the journal and held it, and then she looked at Cole. And for a moment, he saw all of it in her face, the grief and the gratitude and the love that doesn't stop when the blank is gone, but has to find somewhere else to put itself. And all of it, Evie, right there, unguarded, in the September mountain light. He stepped forward and put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into it, briefly, with the kind of trust that doesn't announce itself. And Colton watched this and looked at the valley, and said nothing, and smiled the small private smile of a man who is glad to have lived long enough to see certain things work out. November settled hard over the Colorado mountains. The snow came in earnest, burying the upper slopes and icing the creek, and making the North Ridge Trail impassable, except to someone who knew it well enough to navigate by memory and feel. Cole knew it that well. He went to town when supplies required it, and came back each time to the cabin that was warm and solid and full of a life that was building itself out of what had been ruined, which is how the best lives are built. Evelyn read her father's journal, over the course of 2 weeks, in pieces, the way you eat something that is both nourishing and difficult. She shared pieces of it with Cole, not all of it, not the private parts, but the parts that belonged to both of them somehow. The entry from 4 years ago when Thomas Carter had first decided to begin gathering evidence. The entry where he wrote, in his careful handwriting, "Nay, if this worked, the families get their land. If it doesn't, at least someone tried. Either way, Evelyn will know her father was not a man who stood by and watched wrong things happen." Cole listened and didn't speak. Evelyn closed the journal after reading that entry and looked at the fire for a long time. "He knew," she said again. Differently this time, not grief in it, but something closer to pride. "Knew exactly what he was doing and why. He did," Cole said. "And he trusted me to finish it. He did." She looked at Cole. Do you know how it feels to be trusted that completely by someone who knew you that well?" Cole thought about Marcus, about 7 years of partnership. About the trust that lives between people who have been through hard things together and come out the other side. "Yes," he said. "I do." She nodded slowly. "Then you understand," she said, "why I'm not going to spend the rest of my life grieving what I lost. I'm going to spend it being worth what he believed about me." She held Cole's gaze. "Yeah, that's what I owe him." Cole looked at her, really looked at her, the way he'd been looking at her since the first morning in the cabin when she'd handed him a rusted hinge and been right about what it was worth. "It's exactly right," he said. She didn't need him to say anything else. Winter passed. Spring came to the North Ridge slowly and then all at once, the way spring always comes at elevation, a long gray reluctance, followed by a morning when the air changes and, without seeing any proof yet that it's over. The apple tree bloomed. Cole was on the roof fixing a shingle that the winter ice had loosened when he heard Evelyn's voice from below. "Cole." He looked down. She was standing at the base of the apple tree, looking up at it, and in the morning light, the blossoms were white and extravagant, and completely without apology for having waited through a hard winter to do this. "It's blooming," she said, not surprised she'd been watching for it. Stating it like a fact that had been a long time coming. "I see that," he said. She looked up at him on the roof. "Come down." He came down. He stood beside her and looked at the apple tree, the one that had been half wild and untended for years, the one she'd pruned in September, the one that had stood through the winter and was now doing this. "My father planted apple trees," she said, "on the homestead. Vale burned them. I know. This one's been here longer than Vale's been in Raven Creek," she said. "It was here before any of it. It waited." She looked at it for another moment. "I like that it waited." Cole stood beside her. He thought about all the things that had been here before the bad years and were still here after them. The mountain, the creek, the trail through the upper pass that had existed long before any of them and would exist long after. The apple tree that had stood through neglect and hard winters and the general indifference of the world, and was still here, still doing what it was built to do. He thought about a cabin that everyone called cursed and worthless and belonging to the dead, that was now warm in the mornings, and solid underfoot and smelled like coffee and wood smoke and the particular clean smell of an honest day's work. He thought about a woman who had lowered a knife in the dark because she was tired and desperate, and something in the way he'd spoken had reached past her defenses, and how that one small act of trust had been the beginning of all of this. Evelyn turned and looked at him. "Do you regret it?" she said. Any of it. He knew what she was asking. Not just the run through the mountains, the rifle fire on the pass trail, the 4 miles on foot to Pine Flat. All of it, the dollar, the deed, the door he'd pushed open. Cole Walker looked at the apple tree in bloom, looked at the cabin behind them, solid and real and his. Aidley looked at Evelyn Carter standing in the spring morning, with her hair loose and her face open in the way it was open now that she'd stopped needing to guard everything behind it. He thought about 12 years of moving, and none of it feeling like going somewhere. He thought about finding out, at 38 years old, on the side of a Colorado mountain, what it felt like to arrive. No, he said, not 1 second of it. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she said, good. And she took his hand, and they stood there in front of the blooming apple tree on the south slope of the North Ridge, on a morning in May, with the whole long summer ahead of them. Below, in the valley, the town of Raven Creek was going about the business of becoming something different than it had been, quieter, more honest. The way a place changes when the thing that was wrong about it has been removed, and people are beginning to remember what they were before. Henry Oakes was back on his land. The Brennan family had their fence line restored. Neat Millhaven cases were moving through the federal process, slow but certain. Harrison Vale was in a federal prison and would be there until Cole Walker's hair went fully gray, if it hadn't already. Thomas Carter's work was in the Federal Archive in Denver, cited in the ruling, referenced in the case law, permanent. And, on the North Ridge, on a piece of land that the whole town had called worthless, two people who had each been certain they would always be alone were standing in front of a blooming apple tree, holding hands in the May morning, with no intention of going anywhere. The place everyone said was cursed. The place Cole Walker had bought for $1. The place Evelyn Carter had hidden in, half-starved and hunted, with a knife and a satchel and a dead man's documents and more courage than anyone in Raven Creek had given her credit for. It was not cursed. It never had been. Some places don't look like what they are until the right people find their way to them. And some people don't find their way home until they stop running and open a door they weren't planning to open, in a town they weren't planning to stop in. On a Tuesday that started like every other Tuesday and ended like nothing that had ever happened to them before. Cole Walker had run from grief and guilt and the particular loneliness of a man who believes he has used up his right to belong anywhere. He had bought a $1 cabin on a dead man's ridge. He had found a woman with a knife and a cause and a spine, made of something stronger than anything the mountains were made of. And he had stayed, not because staying was easy, not because the work was finished or the grief was over, or the past had been resolved into something painless, but because this place, this woman, this life, assembled from salvaged timber and repaired hinges and 4 years of a dead man's careful handwriting and one impossible run through a mountain pass, this was worth staying for. The things the world throws away are not always worthless. Sometimes they are exactly what a person needed all along, waiting to be recognized by someone brave enough or desperate enough or honest enough to look twice. Old Walker Cole looked, and what he found on the North Ridge of the Colorado Mountains in the summer of 1881 was the truest thing he'd ever known. He was home.